federalism campaign. At the European level, she has been working a lot with grassroots activists as well as producing locally is one of her mottos that she wants to move forward with. Here you are, Julie.
Okay, thank you very much, Co-Chair. I'm really pleased to be here today because despite the terrible challenges of the pandemic, it also provides an opportunity for leadership. And so being involved with the Urban Economy Forum, being involved in helping to shape the direction for the event later this year, we've been given an opportunity and a challenge that we didn't really expect. We've had a lot of detailed discussions when I was in Toronto in October. Those have continued online subsequently. We're getting to know each other very well, and we're getting to know each other's strengths and what we can all bring to the conversations. But today's roundtable is really important because we're stepping up a level. And that's because you are here, Minister Morneau, and that gives us a direct line into the government, and I think into what could be a more important step into bringing other national leaders into the conversation. We have to be able to build back better going forwards. Lots of people are talking about getting back to normal, but we know that there won't be the same normal. It will be a new normal, and we can help to shape that. So I'm very pleased that you're here today. I want to ask you to really try and take a lead within the Canadian government to bring on people from different ministries. This isn't just something that's about finance, it's also about youth, it's also about women and equality, it's about transport, it's about tourism, it's about culture. We have to take a really holistic view across all those different subject areas and try and knit them and weave them together. And I think that you could take that message back here from the Urban Economy Steering Group and then help us to make that leap onto the world stage. And that's also why I'm involved in the forum, is because I've been working at European level and international level. So I'm very pleased that you're here to listen to what you've got to say and to know where we go from here afterwards, what steps you can help us take to link up with other national governments. So thanks very much for giving us your time.
Thank you, Julie. Your call is timely to bring the whole government together to talk with one voice in solving this crisis. Now we have Honourable Bill Morneau, who is Canada's Minister of Finance and has been in that role since 2015. As you know, the Finance Minister is responsible for directing more than $300 billion in revenues via the federal budget each year. He's a member of the Parliament for Toronto Centre, an accomplished business leader, human resource development expert in children, youth and gender affairs, as well as he has been also instrumental in tabling the first gender-based budget and introduced a banknote featuring the civil rights activist Viola Desmond, making it Canada's first circulation banknote to feature a Canadian woman and first to feature a Black woman. So this is a good day to start this conversation. Honourable Bill Morneau, here you are. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Anantha, and also thank you to Julie, both of you as co-chairs, for having me here. I think before I start, I'd also like to thank Mitchell Cohen, who was the person who introduced me to this group, and just say that I appreciate not only that, but the fact that the Urban Economy Forum and UN Habitat for convening this event this morning. Before I start, I think it's always worth acknowledging, what so many people are going through right now. Obviously, we're all facing up to the challenge of COVID-19, and the impact is severe on so many people. But our our society is seized with the challenges right now that we all recognize, but need to think more about, and that is the challenge of racism in our communities. So I think as we're sitting here, and in many cases in our homes, there are so many people who are out in the streets, really representing those of us who are working on things like this and themselves, in telling us that we all need to do better. And I think it's always important to start there. We do need to do better. My talk this morning, though, will not be about that. It's really much more about the challenge we're facing, COVID-19 in Canada, and more specifically, some of the things that we're looking at moving forward on that will be of importance to the people on this call, as well as all Canadians. I'd like to just start with a little bit of an overview of the situation, some of the next steps for the economy, but then get to issues with working with provinces and territories and municipalities in our country. I know that I don't need to go through all the statistics with the people on this phone. We're all living these statistics on a day-to-day basis. Suffice it to say that the challenge for our economy and for Canadians is enormous. The COVID-19 crisis has had a differential impact on people that are in more low-income categories. It's had a differential and very challenging impact on women, and of course, a very significant impact on young people. And that is in terms of the very real impact on work, and the people that are in jobs that are lower paid in our society have been hurt, both in terms of the amount of work that they have in terms of their hours, but in the case of many, in the challenge with not actually having a job and potentially not having a job to go back to. So we recognize that these will be continuing challenges. As a government, we've been working hard to try to soften the blow for people, to find a way to support people and offer a bridge through what we know will be a challenging time. It will be by definition imperfect, because we won't necessarily be able to solve everything for everyone or every organization, but we're certainly working hard to make sure that we have an impact on those most impacted. Our measures have largely filled the gap in terms of, from an economic standpoint. We have put in place an emergency response benefit, which people will know about, which at peak, 8 million Canadians out of the roughly 38 million Canadians have been on this benefit. So to put it in context, it's about $4 billion a week going out to Canadians on that benefit, which is extremely significant in filling the gap. The wage subsidy we've put in place is now supporting more than 2 million Canadians in many, many organizations across the country, and that program is growing as we speak, as more firms sign on for that, providing them a subsidy so that they can keep their employees on as they get through this time. And we've been supporting small business. There's now been more than 650,000 loans of $40,000 that have gone out to small businesses across Canada. And we know that these supports are important for people, they're important for businesses, but they're also important for our urban centers, places where we live, where we expect to be able to go out to shops, and sustaining that infrastructure and those businesses is going to be critically important. In aggregate, we've seen so far about a $72 billion hit to our economy, and the government measures, together with referrals from banks and others, have filled about $66 billion of that gap. So we have largely filled that economic gap, but we recognize that challenge is going to be great, and it's going to continue. And as I said, incomes will be challenged, in particular for those in lower income groups, youth, and women. Now, that said, the good news is that because of the way we've taken the emergency response benefit, we have filled the gap. So for young people, they are actually being fully, not individually, of course, but in aggregate, we've filled the gap of earnings for young people. We've almost entirely filled the gap for people that are in the lower income categories at the bottom quintile and the next quintile. Of course, not everyone, but we're working hard to make sure that we're helping people across that income scale. And we know have had targets that have been very successful in helping women who've been differentially impacted during the course of this crisis. In looking at what's going on internationally, Canada fares quite well. I'm in regular contact with my G7 and G20 counterparts. The economies in the G7 are gradually all trying to do some form of safe restart. We're at different stages of that. But in Canada, what I can tell you in speaking with our provinces and territories each week with the finance ministers, we are seeing most of our provinces, 8 out of 10, all of our territories moving into some form of safe restart. And certainly the two most populated provinces, Quebec and Ontario, are working to move into that situation as well. We can say that Canada, in terms of the response, is at the forefront. The overall economic response for Canada is in excess of 10% of our gross domestic product. We are at the front of the G7 countries in that response economically, which of course, as I said, is filling a large part of the challenge. But as we know, that challenge will be continuing. So the next steps for the economy, we will continue to have a significant number of unemployed people. The jobs, we saw a jobs report that came out this morning, which was a little better than economists might have expected, but revealed that our unemployment rate is at 13.7%, which is an extremely high rate and will present a real challenge. We have our emergency response benefit, which is currently scheduled to wind down at 16 weeks, which means the people that have been in it for that entire 16 weeks will be asking us about what we can do to continue to support them in the not too distant future. We know that there will be eventually about 3.4 million people coming off that benefit will be going into our employment insurance system, and there will be about 2.2 million that will be challenged and looking for how they can continue to get support since they're not in the employment insurance system. So we're working hard to consider that issue. We do want to continue to support Canadians in this challenging time. And we know that there's an important bridge that we've created, and we need to think about how that bridge is sustained for people that are facing a challenge. Similarly, we announced a couple of weeks ago that we're extending our wage subsidy through until the end of August. And we're looking at the challenge around doing that in a way that allows businesses and enterprises to continue to be subsidized for their support of their workers. That is intended to keep that job in place. And we're looking at how we can do that in a way that broadens it so businesses, as they get back to work, will be able to have the support they need during a time where their revenues might continue to be very challenged. So this is a complex and a critical endeavor which we're working on. But the safe restart means more than just direct support for people. We know for the people on this phone, on the Zoom call, that it means we need to think about how we deal with that safe restart in a way that enables all parts of our country to get back to work. So we are working with provinces on how best to do that. There's some critical issues that we know we need to work together with provinces on. That it would be things like testing, contact tracing, and PPE. We know that while the federal government is going to play the leading role in terms of support around that a lot of the delivery will definitionally happen in provinces, directed through provinces and through cities. We know that we need to have adequate childcare for people as we get back to work, especially given that some of the people that would want to go back to work won't have typical access to supports that they might have in childcare. We recognize that sick leave coverage is going to be critical because we don't want people to be in a situation where if they feel ill, they feel they need to still stay at work to earn money. So we're going to have to, during this COVID-19 period, think about how we can ensure that people can have the ability to be at home if they need to be home for their own safety and the safety of their co-workers. We also need to look at vulnerable groups, including long-term care. That will be very important for us to work together again with provinces, given that that's in a provincial jurisdiction. And it will mean thinking about other areas of joint responsibility. We will be looking at the healthcare readiness for any potential second wave, again, working with provinces. And importantly, and I know importantly for people on this call, how we can support municipalities. So all of these issues are really for us in a discussion with the provinces. That's a discussion that has been going on. The Prime Minister had a meeting last night with the premiers of the provinces and the territories to talk about how we can work together in supporting them with funding, but also with measurable impacts on things like testing and tracing, and contact tracing will be important on how we can deliver for those areas that I just mentioned. So the way we've taken the decision around municipalities, you heard us in the past week talk about advancing $2.2 billion in what we call the gas tax fund early to give immediate liquidity to provinces, or rather to municipalities. But we recognize that the loss to municipalities from various sources of revenue, from things like user fees, from transit, is significant. We recognize that the costs to municipalities, increasing costs to manage the reopening, costs like capital costs, personal protective equipment, staffing, are real. And we know that we're going to need to continue to work together with provinces and municipalities to deal with these issues. So our next steps are very much about working together with the provinces on a funding arrangement. We are making progress. There will be, as is always the case in our federation, important discussions that will need to happen, that we can ensure that we find a way to not only give the right support, but that we have the right impact from that support. So far in this crisis, the federal government has picked up about 87% of the costs of supporting Canadians. And we've also directly supported provinces in any fundraising they need to do through guarantees to the Bank of Canada on their debt. So we will continue to work together. We know that that's critically important. We know it's important for Canadians, it's important for municipalities, and for all of our long-term health and economic success. So with that, thank you very much for having me. I look forward to continue to working on these issues, and I look forward to the kind of impact that people on this phone, on this Zoom call, will have in helping us to get to the right answers.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Minister, for very informative and inspiring remarks. We recognize the government's unwavering commitment to support Canadians, the healthcare system, and the economy. We also noticed that how do we open up the society again in such a way that we don't have relapse. And we also have noted that the vulnerable groups will now be important groups that government would be prioritizing. This, I suppose, will include the homeless and unemployed as well. And your commitment to young people and women also have been noted with great interest. So we hope to continue this conversation, and we also noticed that you are working well both nationally, coordinating efforts, as well as internationally in linking up with the governments, both the developed and developing. Thank you once again, and hope you will stay with us for the rest of the session to take eventual questions and discussions as well. Thank you very much again. May I then request Reza Pourwaziri, who is the chairman of Urban Economy Forum. He was the first UN Habitat advocate, having demonstrated working partner of the UN and the leader of the international organization in many urban fields. He is skilled in architecture, urban planning, sustainable design, strong business development, and he also is a renowned architecture both in his home country and in Canada. He has been instrumental in organizing both Urban Economy Forum and Northeast Roundtable. Here you are, Reza Pourwaziri.
Thank you so much, Krishnan. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for accepting our invitation. And I really appreciate Honorable Minister for your support. Today is the first time we celebrate World Environment Day since the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. It has forced the world to change its behavior in ways we could only imagine and start a huge transformation in human lifestyle. The fitting theme of this year, World Environment Day, is Time for Nature, with a focus on its role in providing the essential infrastructure that supports life on Earth and human development. In a rapidly urbanization world, to accelerate the realization of SDGs, we need to change our understanding of urban resources and build on the serious momentum that is growing globally. During this unexpected time, global society has also achieved many things. We have been forced to reduce our consumption to unbelievable level. For example, almost stop air travels, but we still need to convince ourselves to alter our lifestyle permanently. It appears to me that we are indeed able to review and correct our lifestyle's mistake and pay the cost. We must build on this momentum and create a new dialogue on urban resources to think better and more efficiently about the world's resources and the significant role of cities for a better future. Countries need an index-based system for assessment that is produced by urban data and with technology to correctly identify multidimensional characteristics and can recognize priorities and important action to take. Governments need accurate and evaluative tools to know the needs, priorities, and demands in each area and how decision makers can distribute their national resources effectively based on the current state of their cities, especially during the challenging time like COVID-19. This kind of assessment will be a great tool for all governments to make more informed decisions and recognize priorities and actions. Canadian cities believe in sustainability and are trying to realize it. With over 81% of Canadians living in cities and towns, Canada has a pioneer role for the future of urban assessment. Based on collaboration between UN Habitat, CMHC, and Urban Economy Forum, we hope to realize this through the Regent Park World Urban Pavilion. We request Minister Bill Morneau, we request to continue to be part of and provide support to carry this conversation forward. With your support, we will have an extraordinary opportunity to realize urban sustainability. Canada, United Nations, and the world need to pioneer this tough and necessary transformation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reza. Thank you, Reza, for your powerful remarks. Then next is our co-organizer of the roundtable, UN Habitat, represented by Eduardo Moreno. He's the head of knowledge and innovation at UN Habitat headquarters in Nairobi and the interim director of the Mexico and Cuba country offices, now based in Mexico City. Eduardo has over 25 years of academic and professional experience in housing and urban development policies, institutional analysis, global monitoring, and equity and urban poverty issues. Apart from being a prize-winning social photographer, recently won a gold medal for his photography competition in Moscow. He's also globally known for measuring what counts. Here you are, Eduardo.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Julie. Thank you to Ananta. It's really a pleasure and it's an honor to be today with the Honorable Minister Bill Morneau. Thank you to Reza Purvasiri and thank you also to Michael Cohen for organizing this event. Comment le monde sera après COVID-19? Je vous dis, ce sera avec COVID. How the world will be after COVID is going to be with COVID. And the pandemic is dramatically changing the way we live, we act, we play, we rest, and also changing the instruments that are required to overcome crises. We always think that we live in a status quo that is not moving, but the reality is this status quo is dramatically changing. It's changing in a speed and in a deepness that we don't know. We are taking important decisions at first hand. We heard Minister Morneau explaining some very important of these decisions, but we also know that in the near future, we need to assess and change as cities, countries, and the world. COVID has taught us very important lessons. I would like to mention very fast some of them. 95% of the diseases were in urban areas or are in urban areas. So we can clearly talk about a crisis of cities associated to COVID. It doesn't mean that cities are the culprit of this. It means that for some reason related to the pandemic, cities are being dramatically hit. The Minister Morneau talked about a differential impact. UN Habitat is preparing the state of the world cities post-COVID, and preliminary data is telling us that the pandemic is taking the diseases, is taking the structural inequalities of people, and is driving them, and this is why this ethnic, this income, and other differences are showing. Some data, very preliminary, is telling us that in developed countries, the difference between poor and non-poor strata could be 1 to 3 in terms of disease and in terms of death. In the developing world and in slum areas, it could be 1 to 5. And in some of the countries where people are confined in some areas to work, in the Arab world, for instance, the ratio could be 1 to 9. We need to rethink the way we reorganize the cities and we address some structural inequalities. We need to rethink the commons. We need to rethink the public goods. And we need to address in a different way some of the sectoral interventions, transport, housing. And I'm really congratulating the Prime Minister Trudeau and also Minister Morneau for allocating, I think, more than $2 billion to municipalities, for us, our cities. And this is very important because it's reactivating public transit infrastructure, roads, technology, but also arts and culture and other important elements. The pandemic is telling us that there are some false dichotomies of some false assumptions. And I would like to mention 2 or 3 of them. The first one that we have seen in the media and in the public debate is not a discussion about a future of greener cities versus low densities. Densities are not the culprit of the pandemic. Healthier cities can be dense cities. What we need to do is to rethink compactness. What we need to think is development, and development per se is not good enough. We need to think in terms of circular economies. We need to accelerate decarbonization. And we need to think in terms of environmental sustainability in the way Reza was mentioning. What is the new role in this new equation of the new normal to resilient cities? Some possible responses in the time that I have. The first one is we need first of all a societal response, an empathy revolution. We need new forms of solidarity. If we don't change that, cities will not change. If we don't change that, perhaps governments will not change as we want. Second is, as we said, the front line of the pandemic is in cities. Then we need to have local government responses. But as the Minister Morneau mentioned, cities or municipalities are undermined by fiscal capacities. How we can restore this economic confidence, but associated to today's social cohesion, how we can rescue cities is the beginning of the way we are going to change in the recovery process. We need to rethink in many parts of the world the role of the state. We need perhaps to think in terms of a welfare state as the Canadian one. In many parts of the world, the transition to neoliberal economies showed to us that weak institutions, weak governments were not ready to respond to this pandemic. Rethinking the role of the state means rethinking governance, rethinking local authorities, and for this is the only way to protect local economy, to create, as the minister was saying, social safety nets, but to address in a structural manner spatial inequalities. We cannot live in a world where the concentration of deprivation and the concentration of vulnerabilities is very clearly located in some parts of the city. Reza mentioned something important, and I would like to repeat it. We need more and better data. We need policy evidence, but policy evidence at the level of the space, at the level of the communities, at the level of local responses. When we create this data, we'll be able to respond to a safe and more resilient world. We need innovation. Innovation in the sense of technology has been one of the great responses of humankind and advancement of society. But at the same time, it has never departed from the possibility of offering responses to people and solutions. Innovation will be the equation of solution. I have to the Honorable Minister Morneau a proposal in my last part of my intervention, based on what also Rosa mentioned. First of all, we would like to know if it's possible a partnership with UN Habitat and obviously other multilateral and organizations to produce the state of Canadian cities post-COVID. Specifically, what is the role of municipalities, how they connect to provinces, how federal responses are serving cities. We have in UN Habitat the City Prosperity Index. We would like to transform this index to the SDG cities, but to see how it adapts to Canadian cities. We need the specificity of Canadian cities, and we would like to use the federal network of the government, of the ministry, to provide resources for cities, creating a kind of national dashboard in which cities, territories, regions, we will be analyzing how they perform, which are the challenges, which are the opportunities. This will be a system for Canada, but a system for Canada that we want to bring to the UN system, a system for the world. The way to start, the place to start is Regent Park World Urban Pavilion in Toronto. And I want to conclude to say that we are extremely thankful to Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation for the support they are providing to this. So we want the government of Canada to work with us to understand how cities are performing in this crisis and how they can become the solution to the problem. This is the proposal to the Honorable Minister. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eduardo, for your remarks as well as your request to the Honourable Minister about facilitating State of the World Cities Report for Canada during and post-COVID context as well. Thank you very much. The next on our list is parliamentarian Adam Wong. He's a Liberal member of the House of Commons, and he was elected from June 1924. He has been in the Parliament. He's currently the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development. Here you are, Honourable Adam Wong.
Thank you very much, and it's good to be back in the UN Habitat family to speak once again. Yeah, I was at the UN General Assembly around this issue a couple of years ago, and I made the observation at the time that when countries go to war, they know the quickest way to defeat their enemy is to destroy their biggest cities. And if national governments know that cities are that important to their enemy, it's a wonder why national governments don't understand how important big cities are to their strength and to their capacity as a country to deliver social, economic, and other benefits to their own citizens. But there is a divide between national governments and cities, and it's explicitly legalized in Canada through the Constitution, that is frustrating our capacity as we start to deal with COVID, but as we start to deal with cities more generally. And that's this. National and provincial governments are afraid of their cities. They're afraid of the cultural power that cities have to shape political agendas well beyond the reach of politicians. We catch up to the political agendas of cities as politicians, but we never get quite ahead of the curve because cities are actually more powerful than national and provincial governments because they frame the debate that all of us exist in politically and electorally. And so for that reason, we almost punish cities by keeping them poor, and in doing so, defeat many of the national agenda items that we sign on to. So poverty reduction, the elimination of racism and the racism tied to colonialism, the elevation of women to full and economic and social equal status. It goes on and on and on. And even inside the Indigenous communities, the one area where we fail to program most effectively is in our major cities. And that's why just last night we added Chantel Moore's name to the list of murdered Indigenous women in this country at the hands of police, as we did last month in Winnipeg with Aisha Hudson. These are names that are not being chanted in the streets, but nonetheless they're the direct result of failed urban systems, failed policing systems, failed governmental systems in urban spaces. If we are going to build stronger back or all systems that have been collapsed during COVID, we cannot do it without cities leading the way. We cannot do it without stronger cities, and we cannot do it without an urban agenda that responds to the fact that COVID has hit our cities harder. And that's why the death counts in Toronto and Montreal are so extraordinary. And they have hit the most vulnerable people in our cities the hardest. The anti-Black racism that we are experiencing in Canada with the death of Regis Korchinski-Paquette and others in recent days, not just recent weeks and months, but in recent days, even as the unrest dominates the headlines globally, is just yet another example of how the most vulnerable who have been shut in and subjected to the most extreme conditions during COVID have become even more vulnerable, even as some of the restrictions are lifted. These realities are tied to a fundamental lack of intentionality around housing and a fundamental underfunding of urban systems that support vulnerable people in their communities. And so if we're going to build back with stronger cities, it begins with stronger housing programs. One of the areas that I'm most proud of, and one of the areas that I have direct responsibility for as a parliamentary secretary with Minister Ahmed Hussein, is in the area of homelessness. We were very, very, very focused on making sure that we not only doubled resources, but changed rules around funding for homelessness as we were moving into the COVID crisis. And we have provided additional dollars through the Violence Against Women programs to make sure that shelters for women were also included in a surge of funding to get us through the last couple of months. We know that that funding is coming to an end, and we know that many of the services that have been extended to people who are homeless is starting to evaporate. And we are clearly hard at work making sure the next wave of support is there for cities. But as we think about how we build out of this, we need to take the lessons of how cities have spent those dollars. They spent those dollars taking people off the street and out of shelters and put them in housing. And as we see finally a response in Toronto to solving the crisis instead of managing the crisis, we can see how effective housing is at ending homelessness as opposed to just building more big blue tents and big shelters. We need to be smart about how we continue this work as we move towards recovery. And the investment of capital dollars into the housing system is fundamental to the recovery. We cannot simply surrender people back to the streets and think that we've done our job. We have used housing as a form of healthcare during this crisis, and it needs to be sustained as part of a universal approach to healthcare. And therefore, the housing funding has got to learn from COVID. It's got to be strengthened coming out of COVID, and it has to be more intentional around solving some of the social, health, and other injustices that we are struggling with in this country to this date. And so while we have done good work during COVID, there is much more important work that lies ahead. And as I said, it involves stepping into housing. And I'll also talk a little bit about long-term care here. Long-term care is the other environment in which COVID has claimed many, many lives. And when we think of long-term care, we think of senior citizens. But when we walk into long-term care homes, what we find are people of all ages with vulnerabilities, people in particular with disabilities, but other vulnerabilities are there. And we look at this and we talk about long-term care as if somehow we only will care for your needs once you turn 65. The truth of the matter is that it's not a long-term care crisis we're experiencing in this country. It's a supportive housing crisis we're experiencing. And where we intentionally federally funded and moved and partnered with cities to prevent the spread of the disease and provide good health care in the homelessness sector, we avoided the tragedies we saw in long-term care. But when we stood back and let the provinces deal with it and just pretended there wasn't federal agency here, we waited for the army to be called in before we assumed federal responsibility here. So the other part of the housing agenda that must be specifically addressed as we come into COVID recovery, if we're going to help cities build back stronger, is in the area of supportive housing. This is critically important. This is fundamental to ending homelessness. It's fundamental to ending the crisis in long-term care. And it's also fundamental to doing something else, which we are turning a blind eye to as we move through this COVID crisis. And that's this. The poverty that surrounds the victims of COVID And the city of Toronto has just started to do data on this, shows that low-income neighborhoods have been impacted at a much more severe rate than high-income areas in our cities as COVID has moved through. And that's because there's something else you notice when you move into long-term care facilities. What you notice are women, particularly racialized women, and almost explicitly African, Canadian, and Black women are doing the frontline care work in most of those homes. So not only are we under-housing these groups, we are also pushing them into the service sector to provide supports in the housing where the danger is most present. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing the racialized poverty impacted the way it is in urban settings. So if we are going to build back stronger, and if we're going to recover the economies of cities, we have got to start to address the social inequities which are housed in cities. And by that, I mean the racism and the poverty and the intersection of underpaid work for women and racialized people. And we have to address that from the perspective of wage supports. We have to address it from the area of supports needed to live productively in our communities. And we have to do it from the perspective of making sure that their housing needs are met, and those housing needs have supports built into them to make them thrive. So to sum up, cities need to be built back stronger, but the way we build back cities stronger is going to be critical to the success of the economic and social recovery and the health recovery of our country. And to do that, the United Nations has given us a work plan. It's called the Sustainable Development Goals. Every one of those issues I just raised is covered by the Sustainable Development Goals. Every one of those issues is intertwined and locked holistically into a program to achieve greater equity, stronger health, racial parity. All of the elements of inequality that are addressed that are highlighted through COVID are addressed if we embrace the Sustainable Development Goals and we move forward with the Sustainable Development Goals in an intentional way. But at the end of the day, it starts with very strong and very focused efforts to build back the economy in what I would call three specific areas. One, it's the capital investment to create housing. Two, it's the operating capacity required to sustain transit systems to make cities functional, and that's operational dollars. And three, we have got to rethink the fiscal architecture of cities, because they're doing the frontline work on social health, they're doing the frontline work on economic justice, they're doing the frontline work on building economies that operate in a healthy and a wise way. And they're the ones who have had the lived experience of COVID, and therefore they're the ones on the front lines with the best vantage point at which to address this health crisis. But as I said in the start, what COVID has shown us is the communities that were in crisis before were the ones that were dealt the death blow during COVID. And if we're going to rebuild, it cannot simply be an economic transfer from the top down through the banks into the businesses. It has got to be a ground up solution that starts by making sure people in cities are healthier, people in cities are treated more equitably, and the city systems that support that equity are funded directly and intentionally by the federal government. This is a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge because of the Constitution and the fundamentalists that some people fundamentalism that some people approach the Constitution with. The Constitution is a part of what reinforced the inequalities that we were just describing. We have to find a way to ignore the Constitution to deal with Canadians and people who live in cities directly. And that's going to take all orders of government, federal, provincial, municipal, and Indigenous orders of government to take the urban agenda much more seriously, because that's where people live in this country, that's where people died in this country, and that's where the solutions are going to lie in this country. And so from that perspective, the investments in housing will be strengthened. The leadership around the Sustainable Development Goals will be more pronounced, and I hope that we have good, smart partners on the ground to help us achieve these goals.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adam Wong. It's important that you raise the issues of homelessness and the long-standing issues of people that have problems in housing, and the question of how institutional racism impinges upon COVID and post-COVID work, and the linking up the SDGs that countries have agreed to the Canadian reality will be all the more important. So you're sort of setting the table for a new way of thinking that's inclusive, non-racial, and gender balanced as well. Thank you very much. We'll carry on the discussion. Thank you again. So now there's a small change in the order of presentations because of the fact that the program rearranged, but some people have to go a bit early, etc. So next is Mr. Michel Cohen. Cohen, who is the president of the Daniels Corporation and has managed the firm since 1984, I think, yes. For almost 30 years, his leadership has carried through several real estate market cycles. He is committed to community development, and he supports numerous charities and non-profit organizations. And he writes policy papers, and also he has been instrumental in the Region Park Revitalization Project, which redeveloping nearly 70 acres of land in the area in Toronto's East End. So he is quite a role model of how a corporation can indeed not only change the face of cities, but cities with, what shall I say, justice and equity in mind. Thank you very much. Here you are, Michel.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this. Minister Morneau, thank you for being part of this. And Adam Vaughan, that was really, truly inspirational. Very exciting to hear you speak about all of the issues and how the federal government needs to take such a powerful role. Now, we all know the last few months have been incredibly challenging, but we have also learned a lot about the future of our homes and our workplaces, our neighborhoods, and yes, in fact, our cities. Today, we're all sitting here and we're beginning, just at the beginning, to contemplate having COVID in the rearview mirror. Today, it's more important than ever that development, the real estate development of our cities delivers positive outcomes for all stakeholders and not just the developer. Now, for that to happen, we need to leverage the billions of dollars that are invested every single year in new development. We have to leverage that to build much more than the developer's bottom line. Today, we need to find the ways to build community capital, to build community capacity, and that will significantly enhance the bottom line for all of us. And the reality is there's no mystery as to how to make that happen. There, in fact, is a roadmaps that we've all been creating. In short, what we need to do is put inclusive local economic development and housing that will be deeply affordable in perpetuity, as Adam Vaughan has just described. Affordable housing in perpetuity that is deeply affordable. This has to be at the top of the agenda in every city across this country and beyond. Now, here in Toronto, the Regent Park revitalization is in fact a living and breathing example of how a challenged, stigmatized inner city neighborhood can be transformed through a long-term public-private partnership. We've learned a great deal as the City of Toronto's development partner over the past 15 years. For example, we've learned the enormous impact of social procurement. We've learned the enormous impact of nurturing local artists and artisans and creating opportunities for social enterprise to flourish. Most importantly, we've learned to listen deeply to local voices, and we've learned that we need to build social infrastructure from the ground up, not from the top down. We're thrilled to be partnering with the Urban Economy Forum and UN Habitat to create the Regent Park Urban Pavilion, the World Urban Pavilion, a global knowledge exchange on building sustainable communities. The Urban Pavilion will provide a platform for the exchange of knowledge, the exchange of best practices, and for moving forward with focus and with intentionality to build cities that are truly inclusive and resilient. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michel Cohen. Your remarks are always both forward-looking and action-oriented. As you say that the Regent Park will be a global example and is based on a kind of a bottom-up approach. And you have indeed proved that words needs to be converted to deeds, as you have done in your work. Thank you once again. Next will be Martina Otto. She leads UN Environment Program, or it's called UN Environment now, work on cities coordinating the UN Environment's wide offer to support and promote multi-level policy integration on cities. Under her responsibility is also the work on buildings with the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, food systems. Her areas of expertise include sustainable energy, transport, buildings, climate change, and air quality, and sustainable consumption and production. As you know, UNEP has been involved in working with Canadian banks in making their dealings sustainable, environment-oriented, and focusing on people and the community. Here you are, Martina Otto.
Thank you very much. Excellency, dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon. Cities are at the front line when it comes to major emergencies, and that's not only limited to the present pandemic, but also goes for natural disasters and impacts related to climate change, for example. Urban economies have been hit hard, we heard that already, with urban life locked down too, with the pandemic response lockdowns. And as we go forward, cities will have to make do with the reduced incomes, while having to continue to provide the essential services in a world where already pre-crisis, the means were often not commensurate with the tasks. The call for creative and collaborative approaches and approaches that address several issues at once is very vibrant. And I want to highlight really 3 points. The first is nature matters. The pandemic just sent us a big wake-up call. The food we eat, the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the climate that makes our planet habitable all come from nature. To care for ourselves, we must care for nature. In building back our economies, we need to build back better for people and the planet. When cities care for a natural habitat within and around them, ecosystems provide additional services, such as the reduction of heat island effects, flood control, and clean air. So going forward, we must green our cities. Today, we celebrate World Environment Day, and has been mentioned already, and the theme is Time for Nature. So please join us in acting for nature. My second point is collaboration matters, and we heard already a great deal about that. Solidarity, inclusion, and cooperation is key in addressing big issues. Change can happen very quickly. It forces us to align around common sense of purpose. It requires collaboration at the community level, new inclusive business models, and cooperation across all levels of governance and internationally. And my third point is time has come for a new economic model. The crisis has shown us how a sudden stop in current consumption and production patterns directly influences greenhouse gas emissions and air quality. It showed us that complex supply chains have been more frequently disrupted, whereas local supply chains resisted better. So circularity can be a way to build resilience while reducing resources use and with it greenhouse gas emissions. Cities are uniquely positioned to drive a transition from a linear to a circular economy, given proximity to resources, data, and talent, and connections to their hinterlands. One example is local and regional agriculture, with local governments able to support through public procurement rules, the provision of mobile markets, promotion of urban farming to strengthen urban food security and peri-urban livelihoods. And another one is the construction industry, and we heard already quite a bit about that. But it's really the jobs as well that are usually local and in SMEs, and for which the local governments can establish conditionalities requiring the recycling of building materials, design for energy efficiency, as well as the stimuli for retrofitting existing building stock, and not to forget the public procurement as a market lever. Obviously what holds it together is urban planning. And to close, we need to future-proof our recovery measures, increasing resilience and accelerating the retooling of our current unsustainable models of consumption and production. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martina, for describing that we need to not any longer have the idea of having business as usual. We need to move from the current economic thought to a circular economy, which is indeed a big challenge. We hope to work jointly with UNEP in furthering these ideas in action in Canadian cities. Thank you once again. Next will be Dr. Frank Daunt, who is the Secretary General of International Society for Cities and Regional Planning, or ISOCAR. UN Habitat has been working with ISOCAR for a long time, and the Urban Economic Forum has an MOU with ISOCAR, which is also working towards cities that are carbon-free, oil-free cities. Here you are, Frank Daunt.
Oh, yes, thank you so much for having me. Excellency, esteemed colleagues, while the federal governance will remain crucial for a much needed green and carbon neutral recovery, we strongly advocate that city regional planning and governance should be seen as critical to achieve that goal. I vividly remember the 10th World Urban Forum in Abu Dhabi last February, probably the last big gathering before the outbreak of the COVID expanded to Europe. Discussing with the president of the Canadian Institute of Planners, hi Eleanor, and other members of the Global Planning Network, a joint World Planners Declaration to dedicate ourselves to working together and with others to tackle the challenges of the scale and pace of urbanization, informal settlements, the dire consequences of poverty and inequity, and the hazards posed to both humans and the environment by climate change and natural disasters, including pandemic diseases. In that declaration, we agreed we will build the capacity for creating safe, healthy, and sustainable settlements by mobilizing, sharing, and developing the knowledge and skills of planners. I think this is our proposition. We asserted that there can be no sustainable development without sustainable urbanization, and no sustainable urbanization without effective health-based and people-centered planning. Political support and financial and human resource investment are required for an effective green recovery. Representing the International Society of City and Regional Planners, I really would like to stand by that common goal and call for continued and strengthened international cooperation and solidarity. Not such a obvious thing anymore. ISOCARP and its many planning volunteers all over the world can lend many helping hands in both Global South and Global North. I'm happy indeed to announce that ISOCARP signed an MOU with the Urban Economy Forum and just installed a new community of practice on urban economy and urban innovation to share knowledge. Please do not hesitate to visit us online and join our upcoming World Planning Congress indeed in Doha, with a focus on post-oil and post-COVID-19 cities and the need for green and healthy urban deals. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Frank. It's important that the planners, architect professionals indeed take active role in retooling cities, as it has been said here. Thanks once again. Next is Mr. Michel Tremblay, who is Senior Vice President of CMHC. He is dealing with policy and innovation. He leads Canada's foremost team of experts and analysts responsible for accelerating housing affordability. That's quite an important thing. And he has also been instrumental in crafting the policy and program recommendations for Canada's first ever national housing strategy that was launched 3 years ago nearly. He also champions CMHC's efforts to promote equity, diversity, and inclusiveness, both gender-based analysis plus, for example, both in his workplace and in programming. Here, Mr. Tremblay.
Thank you very much, everyone, and bonjour tout le monde. C'est un plaisir de me joindre à vous aujourd'hui. I hope you are all personally coping well during this pandemic, which obviously has not been easy on anyone. CMHC very much views housing as key to the economic prosperity, sustainability, and social inclusion of our cities. Housing is as much a part of a city's critical infrastructure as roads, public transit, healthcare facilities, and power facilities. I think everyone would agree that COVID-19 has reminded Canadians and, in fact, people around the world of the importance of the home as a sanctuary during these uncertain times. Je suis très fier que la CHL a pu jouer un rôle de premier plan dans la réponse du gouvernement fédéral dont le ministre Morneau a fait allusion à la pandémie. We took immediate action to help Canadians keep their homes by allowing mortgage deferrals for homeowners, as well as property owners of multi-unit residential buildings, which CMHC insured mortgages. Nous avons aussi accéléré le soutien financier aux fournisseurs de logements à but non lucratif et aux coopératives et insisté que les fournisseurs de logements qui recevaient un financement fédéral s'abstiennent d'expulser leurs locataires pendant la crise. Working with the Department of Finance and the Bank of Canada, we also helped provide liquidity to the financial systems so that Canadians could continue to access funding. And just recently, we launched a program to deliver rent assistance to small businesses that have been hit hard by economic lockdown, which were caused by COVID-19. All of these measures obviously contribute to the financial stabilities of our cities and our country. And we hope that it's going to help us launch a way out of this pandemic. We obviously want to make sure that access to housing, we've mentioned it, Mr. Vaughan mentioned it, is part of the solution to COVID-19 and does not add to the health and economic problems that we've already been facing. At CMHC, we've set an ambitious goal for ourselves that by 2030, everyone in Canada has a home that they can afford and that meets their needs. Our work is obviously underpinned by the governments of Canada's National Housing Strategy, a $55 billion plus plan that aims to reduce housing needs and homelessness across the country. We're continuing to monitor COVID-19 and other external factors to assess their impact on our strategy for achieving housing affordability. We hope that housing is very much at the center of Canada's efforts to rebuild our economy as we come out of the pandemic. For my colleagues and I, the COVID-19 pandemic has only strengthened our resolve to achieve our aspiration. We very much believe that innovation is one of the keys to addressing issues and challenges across the spectrum. That's why we've created a dedicated innovation function at CMHC to bring people together to encourage and facilitate new and different thinking about housing. The National Housing Strategy itself has also provided specific funding for these programs, such as Housing Solutions Lab, demonstration projects, research and scholarships, and coming soon, a Housing Supply Challenge. In short, we want to accelerate housing affordability in Canada through, it was mentioned, through evidence-based policy, research, and disruptive innovation. We obviously don't have all the answers. We won't achieve our aspiration on our own. We need active and continued support and involvement from many of the traditional and non-traditional players in the housing ecosystem, as many as possible. The opportunities that was mentioned for collaborations are there. We're strongly interested in strengthening our collaboration with municipalities. We believe they're critical to unlocking housing supply, supporting affordable housing, densification, and other approaches that would not only support our goal or our aspiration, but also the UN Habitat Sustainable Development Goal. Through the strategy, we're offering municipalities access to funding to support creation, preservation of affordable housing, but we also want to offer data, research, market insights that can support their planning exercises and lead to development of innovative, affordable housing solutions that can hopefully be replicated on a national basis. We also need to look outside our own borders for best practices and solutions. And we have been at CMHC strong supporters of UN Habitat and its own aspiration of the housing sustainability by 2030. Canada was, in fact, a very active participant at Habitat 3 Summit in Quito, I believe 4 years ago now. Time really flies. I think it was 2016. As Reza mentioned, we're very excited to be supporting the establishment of Regent Park World Urban Pavilion in Toronto, sponsored by the UN Habitat, the Urban Economy Forum, and the Daniels Corporation. Regent Park is ironically originally funded by CMHC some 60 years ago now, was selected in part because of the neighborhood's ability and ongoing development, which is viewed as a model that can be replicated elsewhere. It's a success story, really. Notre appui pour ce projet est conforme à un des objectifs de la stratégie nationale sur le logement, de développer et aussi de présenter des solutions innovatrices de logements abordables qui peuvent être appliquées dans d'autres villes et même dans d'autres pays. I'd like to close my remarks by thanking both the Honourable Minister Morneau for hosting this roundtable, but also the Urban Economy Forum for inviting CMHC to participate. thank you and looking forward to hearing the other speakers. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Tremblay. It was quite interesting to hear your thoughts as well as your unflinching commitment to the World Urban Pavilion, which we hope will become Canada's window to the world, not only Toronto's window to the world. So that's why we need to sort of develop that and to see that whatever has been said globally can be done locally, and the Canada example can be also be a model for the rest of the world as well. Thank you once again. So next we have is Mayor Naheed Nenshi. He is the 36th mayor of Calgary, Canada. As you know, he's a popular mayor. He won with nearly what 74% of vote. He also writes, and he's an academic as well. And he says that he believes in working hard to make this a great place, Calgary a great place, even better. So he has also been closely working on solving the COVID-19 crisis, in engaging in testing along with the province as well, which I think is quite important. And here you are, your worship, Naheed Nenshi.
Well, thank you very much. Bonjour tout le monde. C'est vraiment mon plaisir d'être ici avec vous, virtuellement, ce matin ici. Thanks so much for coming together to have this conversation. And, you know, I'm not sure that we have a lot of new things to say. I think we all know that we are living in a moment where, for the first time in human history, the majority of humanity lives in cities. And that urbanization will only continue, which means that urban issues are, in fact, human issues. The COVID-19 pandemic, especially here in North America and in Europe, has been an urban pandemic. There are vast swaths of Canada where there is not a single case, or where there are one or two cases. And the pandemic has really forced us to think differently about how we live together in a world that is different than the worlds and the cities that we have built. So we're going to hear a lot about this, but maybe I'll just tell you very specifically what's going on in Calgary. We are dealing in Calgary with what I call a quadruple whammy. The first is the public health crisis, of course, that everyone in the world is dealing with. The second is the global recession and the impacts, particularly to small business and retail businesses in cities. Here in Calgary, the third has to do with the absolute collapse of the energy economy. And the fourth, here in Calgary, is the absolute collapse of the travel and tourism economy. So when we look at all of those things together, we find that we're in a very serious problem. And so the city of Calgary, like most cities in Canada, cannot easily run a budget deficit. But because of changes to transit and to our facilities and increased costs in managing COVID, Calgary is losing about $10 to $15 million per week. By the end of this year, we will be looking at a budget deficit, depending on whether businesses go bankrupt or not and are unable to pay their taxes, anywhere between $150 and $400 million. And as I said, under our legislation, we can't easily run a deficit. So we have to make that money back next year in the absence of any assistance from the federal or provincial governments. And that we only have two ways of doing that: massive cuts to services or massive increases to property taxes. Neither of those are tenable in a situation of a slow economic recovery. So as we are balancing off the public health crisis, the mental health crisis, and the economic health crisis, we need to really think creatively, as Adam Vaughan said, about what do we do not just in the short term, but in the long term to build resiliency in our cities. And so very briefly, you know, we've been asking for 5 things. Number 1, aid to the vulnerable and nonprofits that serve them. Number 2, aid to businesses that are in trouble. Number 3, direct aid to municipalities who are providing these services. Number 4, stimulative infrastructure to create jobs, get us out of here, and build infrastructure that is desperately needed. And number 5, thinking about how we build more resilient communities, more economically and socially resilient communities going forward. And you heard Adam Vaughan a little bit earlier talk about one of my moonshots, which is, what if we say that Calgary, for example, a city of 1.3 million people, is going to be the first city in North America where we end functional homelessness after this crisis? where we actually say, because people have been dislocated, how about nobody goes back to the emergency shelters that they were in before? How about we use our power that we have been able to use and money that we've been able to find to fight this crisis to make sure that we are more resilient for all crises going forward. So thank you everyone for being here, and I hope that we will be able to get some good solutions out of today's conversation.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, Nahid Denshi. The resilient city in combating the three health crises and building resilience, of course, is the key word that we hope that can learn from the lessons of Calgary and eventually, use it for examples elsewhere. So next we have is Mayor Mauricio Bevilacqua. He is from the city of Vaughan. He's a respected community leader and nationally recognized as a politician who builds consensus, as I have seen from media, etc. As a mayor, he has worked to create a city with higher purpose of a strong sense of community, which many of the speakers have talked about, while remaining committed to moving forward without leaving anyone behind. And he became I think your city was sort of the first to declare state of emergency after the COVID crisis. So we need to listen from you how we have moved forward. Here you are, Your Lordship, Mauricio Bevilacqua.
Thank you so much. And first of all, let me express my warmest and sincerest gratitude for organizing this gathering of the minds. I think it's very important during this crisis to listen to various ideas and perspectives. And we often hear about a lot of uncertainties that COVID-19 has created, and how we are living in unprecedented times. However, upon reflection, we all know that there are certain certainties about COVID-19. That COVID-19 is here, that COVID-19 is spreading, COVID-19 has taken human lives, that COVID-19 has impacted our economy, reduced our GDP, increased our unemployment, increasing our deficits and debts. And we also know that a vaccine is not yet available, and many experts are telling us that there will be a second wave, which leads me to the theme of being ready, resourceful, and resilient. I can tell you that we must remind ourselves that during a crisis that we are not helpless, that we have the tools to respond. And in 30 years of public life, 22 years at the federal level, I can tell you that I've never seen a government response as comprehensive as the one that I've seen here with COVID-19. And I lived through free trade and 9/11, financial crisis, and so on through those 22 years. So all three levels of government, I must say, have been totally engaged at the task at hand. And but we need to give context to where do we go from here? How is recovery going to take place? And for us to really clearly outline an agenda that for the recovery, we need to really practice what I practice in decision making, and that is bringing the future to the present, which leads us to developing scenarios as to what is the future going to look like. And within the sphere of the recovery, we've got to, of course, within that framework, look at the impact on the economy, unemployment, the changing nature of work, the enhanced role of technology, not just for companies, but also for individuals, the greater concentration on smart city initiatives. I think the smart city, COVID-19 has also taught us a great deal how important smart cities initiatives are as they relate to productivity, as they relate to quality of life and standard of living. Now, in fairness, I think we understand that COVID-19 has really highlighted some of the many challenges that we have historically had. I think this group will agree that we've had challenges of environmental sustainability, on transit, on affordable housing. We have witnessed income disparity and income polarization in this country now for a while. In reference to cities, we've seen the fact that, on capital investments and operational dollars and the fiscal framework, a required change, that is for sure. So COVID-19's purpose has also been to remind us to be ready and to also not leave work undone. And what I mean by that is that we need to be focused on these key areas of building cities. I want to share with you a little bit of the bond story, and in reference to this framework of being ready, resourceful, and resilient. My city was tracking COVID-19 6 weeks prior to the declaration by WHO as COVID-19 being a global pandemic. Why did we do that? Because emergency preparedness is very important to our city. We were already working on developing alternative workplace arrangements, which means that we're giving resources to our employees to work from home. What COVID-19 has done for us is it has accelerated that process. And what we are finding in our early results is that productivity, retention, recruitment, and we've also witnessed, obviously, some savings. We enhanced the remote access capabilities at home for individuals, and every department in the city was part and parcel of this citywide strategy of business continuity plan. And we are offering, of course, online service virtually in recreation with our libraries and our business community and individuals. And this we also apply to civic participation as it relates to participation in meetings and committees. Why is that important? It's important because a crisis cannot stop a city from moving. As a matter of fact, I often say, COVID-19, as COVID-19 persists, city building continues. And let me make a point for you. The reality of COVID-19 in economic terms is not the same right across the board. For example, our city, where over 19,000 businesses resided, they create approximately 225,000 jobs. We're growing at an employment growth is around 5%. What we found was that when it comes to building permits, we've actually, when you compare 2017, 2018, 2019, this first quarter, we've actually seen a spike of 70%. So I say this only to illustrate that that COVID-19 response cannot be a one size fits all. We see it in our own city, and we see it in our own country, and we see it globally. There isn't a single magic bullet that's going to cure the impact of COVID-19, but you have to get back to some very basic fundamentals: productivity, making sure that people have the services they require, and that requires also, of course, investment. For my ask, of course, as you pointed out, put something on the table. It's an ask that should not surprise people, and that is that, Canadian municipalities require funding from the senior levels of government in the neighborhood of $10 to $15 billion. And I don't mean this as an ask sort of cap in hand. I mean this as true partners in the recovery. I cannot see an economic recovery without the cities being involved. That is where most of the population live, right across the world. Without cities, it's very difficult to bring about an economic recovery. And so areas like environmental sustainability, housing, transit, dealing with income disparities is very, very important to move forward. So I leave you with a message that the lesson of COVID-19 is also that, as a society, as a global society, we cannot be blind or deaf to things that we heard in the past. Global pandemic is not a new term. The effects of a global pandemic is nothing new. Many statements, research has been done on that. We have to, and we should not fall into a false sense of security and think that our generation somehow is going to be bypassed by something like COVID-19. That is a valuable lesson for all of us. That means that we have to be ready, we have to use our resources, and we have to be resilient. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Lordship. This is a very important message from a person who really has been tackling this pandemic firsthand and saying that resilience is important and preparedness, alertness, and we cannot be complacent in face of crisis. A very good message indeed. Now we have Her Lordship Bonnie Crombie, who is the mayor of Mississauga, and she is no stranger to Canadian politics. She was a member of the Canadian the House of Commons, and before that, entrepreneur and a consultant. Your Lordship, Bonnie Crombie.
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction. And yes, I'd like to share how Mississauga is coping with the pandemic in this time of crisis. And I'm glad to see that there are federal, and I was hoping provincial members on this call so we could each relay the financial hardship that it has imposed on us differently. To put things in context, Mississauga is an edge city, the 6th largest in Canada, the 3rd largest in Ontario, Toronto, Ottawa, and then Mississauga. We have 98,000 businesses, 75 Fortune 500 companies, and 1,400 multinationals. We are a vibrant, diverse, very inclusive, welcoming city. And I think we may have been the first to offer the call to prayer as a solution to the isolation and depression that many members of the Islamic community, the Muslim community, were feeling during Ramadan. And so that was an initiative that many other cities embraced, and we were very, very pleased to lead the way. Like all of you, our city hall has been closed since the beginning of the pandemic, since the emergency orders. Yet we're still operating at full capacity. And we have learned, just as businesses has had to learn, that we have to be nimble, adaptive, and we have to reinvent ourselves in the way that we offer programs and services and do so differently as we're offering online recreational programs to our residents, such as yoga classes, Tai Chi, etc. So those are some of the smaller lessons that we have learned. We're also promoting ourselves as made in Mississauga made solutions to business. We're asking our residents to shop local. We're one of the first to have joined Shop Here, which is the digital Main Street program by Google, a shop online service, and we're very proud to be behind that and to have joined. It is powered by Google, supported by Shopify, and it comes at a critical time to allow businesses to provide customized online services at no cost. And once again, we have created a virtual marketplace called Mississauga Made, in a campaign to give our local businesses, who are really our neighbors, our friends, and our family, and we need to support and get behind, give them a platform and give them a voice. And we have witnessed many of them changing the way they do business, whether it is curb front or delivery services. It is they have really managed to be innovative and readapt the way they're offering their products and services. My advice to the federal and the provincial government, to our cities, if I can put it into context for you, this is a financial crisis for municipalities. I urge you to be urgent in your thoughts and direct. We very much welcome the announcement that was made just now of $14 billion of funding from the federal government. I think that meant $5.5 billion for Ontario, largely to community health care, testing, tracing, LTCs, etc. We are dissecting the announcement, learning to see what will be available for cities for our operations, because as you know, we're facing an operating deficit, and I'm going to talk about that in 1 second. While we appreciated the early gas tax funding that was made available last Monday, I have to say that really only solved gave us a little bit of liquidity on the capital side, but it was money that we had already planned for, already accounted for, and did not address our operations crisis at all. So it wasn't very helpful. In Mississauga's terms, we are at the end of June to be in a $60 million deficit. That's probably middle of the range. I know Toronto burns 65 million per week, and largely that is their transit. Our transit is 7.5 million a month. So not insignificant either. As you all know, we're not collecting revenues. We have deferred all our revenues, as has everyone, and we have deferred about almost $400 million in property taxes. So we, like everyone, will have liquidity issues. We had the foresight to extend our liquidity from $100 million to 250. So we are on sound footing. We're a fiscally well-run city. We have solid reserves, but at the same time, we're paying essential services, including police, fire, paramedic, transit workers, long-term care, PSWs, sanitation workers, waste and sanitation, etc. So we have a large payroll to meet, and yet we have deferred virtually all the revenue that we earn. Our transit revenue represents about 44% of the total, and another 39% is from recreational programs and services that, since our facilities are closed, we're not able to offer those programs, even though we are, as I mentioned, offering some of them online. We don't have the ability, as other governments, levels of government do, to run deficits. I think we're all acutely aware of that. And with respect to our transit, as I said, we're losing $7.5 million. When it does come back, we've offered plexiglass shields for our drivers to give them better protection. We will be asking that people wear masks on board, but it will cost us twice as much to transport half as many people with the physical distancing guidelines in place. So as you know,
if you kindly, yes.
Just wrap up. Sorry.
Yes.
Are we wrapping up?
Wrap up? Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
The
yes.
last thing I think I'll impose is that, share with you, is that municipalities are the only level of government to really have laid off of their employees. And in Mississauga's case, it has been over 2,000 workers, and also implemented a hiring freeze. So we're very much concerned about cities' liquidity issues. So we're asking the federal and the provincial government to do what they can to make it direct and to make it urgent. Thank you very much for allowing me to share our financial position.
Christian, you're muted.
Sorry. So I just wanted to thank you once again, Mayor, for bringing the faith communities together in these times of hopelessness. It's quite important as well. And we have Pasternak. The next one would be James Pasternak, who is from the Toronto City, Ward number 6, I think. You are Mr. Pasternak. Are you there, James? Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Please.
So thank you very much for, if you could restart my time. That's a common statement we make in council meetings. That's a gracious invitation. I thank you very much to the UN Habitat and Urban Economy Forum. And I want to thank all the participants, Minister Morneau, civic leaders, academics, members of the media, mayors, and other elected officials. I chair the Infrastructure and Environment Committee of the City of Toronto, a committee that reviews and appropriates much of the capital expenditures and infrastructure building in the City of Toronto. And I just want to say off the top that I've seen the 3 levels of government work collegially and very well during this crisis. And I'm so proud of our federal system on how the 3 levels of government work: municipal, provincial, and federal. And I think that's why Canada is going to pull out of this very well. Like many municipalities and urban centers, Toronto had a rude and shocking awakening back in the middle of March. We are a city that historically has topped most of the lists for livability, for wellness, for prosperity, for safety. Toronto remains the economic engine of Canada. And of course, people from all over the world want to settle here. Our family of hospitals and social capital supports, shelters, the heroics of our frontline workers and our universal healthcare system, combined with a resilient economy, made us manage the crisis in the best way possible. While deaths were tragic and the illnesses were frightening, the numbers remained manageable and our system was never overwhelmed. Over the last 20 years, through downloads and municipal mergers, Toronto has taken on much more than it can manage. It has taken on one of the largest social housing portfolios in North America. We're responsible for 2 highways, which are really provincial. We carry the burden of daycare, transit operating shortfalls, intake for refugee claimants and asylum seekers. We transfer funds of tens of millions of dollars to school boards. Like most municipalities, as mentioned today, we must, by statute, pass a balanced budget. And I'm sure you heard many times from Mayor Tory that right now we're burning through about $65 million a week. The best case scenario is that we'll come out of this with a $1.5 billion deficit. The worst case scenario is probably about 2.25 or 2.5. Over the past decade, Canadians have woken up to the realization that it is their municipalities that have the greatest impact on daily lives. Canadians realized that during this pandemic, their local government was a source of advice, safety, and healing. And overnight, people could see what they once had and what they lost. The services that we provide, the investments we make, and the policies we introduce shape neighborhoods, impact lives, affects one's businesses, the raising of one's family, the prosperity one will realize, the safety one feels, and the character of children we raise, and of course, mental wellness. If Canada is to be a country of strength and livability, it will be our urban centers and the civic center, culture and political leadership that we have that will determine the recovery and the future. There is a lot of talk these days about money for airlines in the tens of billions. And while airlines are a vital part of our economy and they employ a lot of people and they close the frontiers that we have in Canada, people don't live in airplanes. In fact, 80% of Canadians live in cities, as we've heard a couple of times today. Mayor John Tory and I discussed the other day that monies from other levels of government to help us through this can't be seen as a bailout, but really as an investment. Toronto's GDP outpaces the national average. Employment growth in Toronto between 2018 and 2017 is twice the national average. Toronto is about 8% of the country's population, but is home to about 18%.
Can you wind up, Mr. Pasternak? Yes. Thank you.
Krishnan, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. James Pasternak. Sorry that we are running out of time, and really unfortunate that we are unable to provide more time for extensive discussions. As we will be continuing this dialogue further, I hope we'll be able to count on you to come to continue this process of discussion and dialogue as well. Thank you very much. Now, next we have his Lordship Mayor Barry Frabnovic. He's the Mayor of City of Kitchener and member of Big City Mayors Caucus, Federation of Canadian Municipalities. FCM has been recently making quite a lot of initiatives and efforts in bringing together the possibilities of funding to municipalities in collaboration with the what shall I say, provinces and the federal government. So it'll be good to hear your voice, very Prabnovic.
Thank you very much, Nantha, to you, Reza, and the entire team for organizing this and the opportunity to discuss the current COVID-19 challenges and opportunities going forward that cities like Kitchener and regions like Waterloo, Canada's 10th largest CMA, and the western end of the Toronto-Waterloo Region Innovation Corridor are facing. The COVID-19 health crisis is top of mind for governments. We knew that having an effective response to the health crisis with actions like shutting down and working from home would have an equally negative impact to the economy. But it was the right thing to do to flatten the curve, ensure our healthcare system wasn't overwhelmed, and save lives. As municipalities, we closed our facilities like arenas and community centers for health and safety reasons. But the financial consequence was that our user fee revenue all but went to zero. While public transit stayed open, ridership decreased by over 90%. We also provided a municipal economic support plan, which provides various measures of financial relief to all property owners. This combination of lost revenues and trying to maintain essential services, while the right thing to do, means municipalities are bleeding money and are calling for emergency operating funding from both the federal and provincial governments. Today, let me be clear, Canadian municipalities are in financial crisis. Kitchener is losing at least $2 million per month. The municipalities of Waterloo Region are losing $10 million per month. This week, the Prime Minister recognized this as a national crisis and accelerated this year's gas tax fund payments, and we're thankful for this. But this money isn't new money and only helps us short-term with cash flow. Kitchener joins FCM and my other big city colleagues in calling for at least $10 billion for municipalities to tackle the immediate financial crisis nationwide. We need all governments to step up now. Jurisdictional wrangling must not stand in the way of public safety or Canada's economic recovery. We understand this is an active conversation with First Ministers. Just moments ago, in fact, Prime Minister Trudeau announced $14 billion in funding to the provinces and territories subject to agreements being negotiated. This is great news, but we need municipalities to be a major part of this. Funding needs to go to all municipalities fast and nationwide, and it must be straightforward, direct, and flexible. This means a single transfer that municipalities can use as needed, whether to help with transit or recreational losses, or help with new costs around supportive housing or COVID-19 protections. Looking ahead to the economic recovery, we know that bringing the Canadian economy back to life will require everybody working together, and that can't happen without support for municipalities. Locally, we created the Business and Economic Support Team Waterloo Region, which includes leaders from our business community and other local stakeholders like municipalities. This was done to listen to business concerns and plan our local economic recovery collaboratively. Investing in infrastructure is a proven stimulus strategy, and those infrastructure projects by and large go through municipalities since we own 60% of Canada's infrastructure assets. But without emergency funding from federal and provincial governments, municipalities will have to scale back existing infrastructure projects. That undermines any stimulus plan before it starts. As we go through the economic recovery, talk about the new normal, and discuss doing things better, and in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, we see these problems as opportunities for future improvements. Let's not lose the lessons of this pandemic. Let's fix these things now so that all orders of government can work together to better able serve our citizens and businesses and be ready to weather any future downturns. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Krishnan, you're muted.
Sorry, as you rightly say, Your Lordship, the funding has to go through municipalities and communities. That's the only way we can have sustainable recovery. So now we have Marco Camia, who is a senior economist at UN Habitat, and he is leading the global operational normative work on urban economy and municipal finance. He has written several books and also has been instrumental in the formation of the Urban Economy Forum. Here you are, Marco Camia.
Marco has sent us a video, and I will.
Okay, please.
It is a pleasure to provide a few words from UN Habitat. My name is Marco Camilla, based in Nairobi, Kenya. Thanks to the Minister of Finance of Canada and to all participants in this important roundtable. UN Habitat is working on the urban economy and deeply engaged with local governments to fight the current pandemic and its effects. We are closely coordinating with the Urban Economy Forum, creating a pavilion and planning a report on the future of cities post-COVID-19. In particular, with the COVID-19, cities will need to strengthen health systems, but also will have to build more productive economies to support the cost of building resilience with basic health support and basic services to the population. So looking forward to continuing working together. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the video. Now we have Laura Dudas, who is a deputy mayor of Ottawa. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Bonjour tout le monde. On behalf of Mayor Jim Watson and my colleagues on Ottawa City Council, I want to thank the Urban Economy Forum and UN Habitat for inviting me to participate in today's discussion. The COVID-19 pandemic has been exceptionally difficult for our cities, which have had to react quickly in order to protect our economies and the health and safety of our residents, particularly our most vulnerable populations. The City of Ottawa itself is losing approximately $1 million a day. It's facing net losses of $66 million as of this month, $123 million by September, and $186 million come December. These are significant and unforeseen losses that will have a negative impact on the city's ability to deliver services to our residents. In response to the pandemic, our city has implemented programs and initiatives to help our residents and our businesses get through this challenging time. We've been turning arenas into shelters for our city's homeless populations, while also looking to acquire hotel spaces for longer-term housing alternatives. We're deferring property taxes and operating emergency childcare centers for our frontline workers. But at the same time, we're keeping our essential cities services running, even after making the incredibly difficult decision to temporarily lay off more than 4,000 city employees from a workforce of roughly 17,000. The cost of this increased programming and maintaining regular operations is coupled with the loss of the city's revenue generating streams, such as transit fares, user fees, and property taxes. And as we've just heard, this is not a City of Ottawa problem alone. This is a substantial challenge facing cities right across our country. I would like to extend my thanks to Prime Minister Trudeau and Minister Morneau for announcing that the federal government will accelerate the gas tax funding for 2020. But as it's been said before, this $2.2 billion was already budgeted for, and that we are asking for more to be done. The City of Ottawa is echoing the call from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, asking the federal government to provide flexible emergency operating funding. For cities, this money is important for us to keep essential municipal services going strong as we look to recovering from this pandemic. As a member of the City of Ottawa's Economic Partners Task Force, I've been seeing firsthand how our local businesses are the hard hit by this pandemic and are struggling to survive. Our city has introduced initiatives targeting support to these local businesses, but there's still those that are slipping through the cracks. These small and medium-sized businesses are truly the backbone of our economy, and they need our help. At the same time, our local economy is bracing for the anticipated loss of tourism in the coming months, which is a key economic driver for the National Capital Region. So I'll just summarize to say that cities cannot do this alone. And in order to deliver the support that our businesses and our residents need throughout this, we will need to continue to work in collaboration with our federal and our provincial partners. It's going to take all of us to get through the COVID-19 pandemic recovery stage. And I want to thank our federal and provincial partners for their continued support.
Thank you, Madam. As you rightly say, cities cannot do this alone. The partnership as well as collective action with available funding is key to any recovery that is sustainable. Now we have Jeffrey Russell from Accenture. One of the mottos of one of the leading companies, Accenture, is data, actions, and outcomes. This is what we need at this time and hour. Here you are, Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Anantha and Julie, our co-chairs, and to so many mayors and distinguished guests from across Canada, the globe, and of course, Minister Morneau. It's a true honor to be speaking to you today. I'd like to spend my remarks sharing what we at Accenture believe to be the key actions and priorities that cities must start thinking about and acting on now. Largely technological shifts that will help all of you navigate the recovery period and ensure a sustainable economic future. As way of background, Accenture works across 13 industry groups here in Canada, including, of course, public service and health. We've been working with various federal, provincial, and municipal departments and agencies around the crisis. For example, to highlight that, we helped the Canadian government and the ESDC department launch the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit to to provide financial aid to Canadians impacted by COVID. In just 4 days, we were able to set up a call center for a team of 2,600 Canada-based agents. Throughout April, these agents handled more than 40,000 calls a day as millions of Canadians applied for financial relief. So in short, we believe public sector organizations, including cities and infrastructure, have the opportunity to really embrace innovation and digital transformation. So as we think about the challenges facing the cities, including the loss of major revenue sources, as all of you have so aptly pointed out, and of course, mounting pressures on things like shelters and food banks and shortage of affordable housing, we think the real opportunity is around data and the insights that can come from data in terms of the opportunity for shooting high around that. And of course, contract tracing as one good example of that will be a key element as we all return to work and school and play in the coming months. I think pre-COVID, we saw rising citizen expectations. Our budgets were continuing to be under pressure at all levels, and of course at municipal levels. And then of course the onset of sustainability imperative defining city challenges for the future that many from the UN Habitat have so rightly pointed out today. So as we think about the impacts of COVID, and some of these will be permanent, it's even more critical that cities embrace data, they embrace digital, and they embrace the ecosystem collaboration that's available to them. And our global digital transformation report, in fact, identified a strong ROI between the level of digitization and the level of economic recovery. An increase in digitization increases GDP, it increases international trade, and of course, employment. The cities that thrive will be those that use data to inform decisions around things like public health, safety, housing, mobility, and those that successfully digitize operations and support remote work. Pivoting to digital will enable cities to better manage infrastructure and imagine our futures, from mobility solutions to 5G. And those innovations and data are driving better decision-making, maximizing use of limited resources while achieving better outcome for citizens. And what was taking 3 years to accomplish has been happening in months and weeks in the past 3 months. So speed is the new currency. I think the notion of sprints versus long serial plans for implementation, and of course the smart use of data is crucial. So this is the time for industries and all levels of government to come together and innovate solutions to address the crisis and support economic recovery. So thank you and merci beaucoup.
Krishnan, you're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Russell, for your remarks. As you rightly say, speed is a new currency. And we're also happy that Action will be working closely with Urban Economy Forum, UN Habitat, in furthering using data and artificial intelligence and analysis in furthering sustainable urban development in the post-COVID era as well. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Mr. Brian Roseborough, who is the Executive Director of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. Mr. Roseborough?
Thank you very much for the invitation and good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here on behalf of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. AMO's member municipal councils govern and provide services for about 1 in 3 Canadians. And municipalities in Ontario have been on the front line of the COVID-19 emergency. Since it began. And Ontario municipalities are on frontline services in a number of ways, not just what one expects typically, such as police and fire, but in Ontario it also includes public health, childcare, housing and homelessness, paramedic services, and a role in long-term care. All of those services have been immediately and dramatically affected by COVID-19. All have faced extraordinary new costs and will face added structural costs in the future, at least until an effective vaccine or treatment is available. The same is true for public transit, which faces much higher operational costs and a profound drop in revenue that will carry on for months, if not years. Ontario responded almost immediately with its first step, which was $148 million in social services relief funding
to help offset increased municipal human services costs. That block funding has literally saved lives, but has now been exhausted. As you heard earlier this week, the Government of Canada announced its first step in assisting municipalities by advancing the 2020 gas tax funding for infrastructure, a very welcome development. The federal gas tax program is an extraordinary example of direct federal financial support for municipalities in Ontario, mediated through a trilateral agreement between Canada, Ontario, and municipal governments represented by AMO and the City of Toronto. It stands as an ideal model for much needed emergency operational funding for municipalities and is the model set out in the FCM proposal, which AMO supports fully. Without immediate financial assistance, the alternatives of property tax increases, service cuts, or deferred capital investment will undermine economic recovery. Ontario's $50 billion municipal sector is eager to play its essential role in the restart and recovery. And in addition to emergency financial assistance for operations, municipalities are the ideal destination for federal and provincial capital investments, including for housing, to help rebuild the economy, to put people back to work, to serve the most vulnerable in our society, and to ensure much needed infrastructure is in place to sustain productive economies into the future. In Canada, trust in government is at an all-time high right now. And people trust that all orders of government will work together toward a common purpose of sustainable, healthy, and safe communities. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this conversation.
Thank you very much indeed. So we hope to hear more from you during our discussions. And next we have let me see, there are a few people are saying that they have to leave a bit early. So I don't know, I may have to take the liberty of maybe requesting, is it Martin Medeiros from the City Council of City of Brompton, which is supposed to be a city of culture, arts, and inspiration. Hero Martin Medeiros.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of Brampton's Mayor Patrick Brown as we collectively look for ways to take action to increase the resilience of communities and learn from each other. Certainly, the COVID-19 pandemic provides a once-in-a-lifetime responsibility to accelerate the change we require in Canadian cities. Brampton is one of the fastest growing cities in Canada. Brampton has the youngest, most diverse population with the highest transit ridership and largest household size within the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Brampton is also disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. The City of Brampton, through the adoption of Brampton 2040 Vision, has committed to making a shift from auto dependency to a new growth model of sustainability and social resiliency. The city is focused on delivering walkable, healthy, and resilient 20-minute neighborhoods to transform transportation corridors into sustainable transit-oriented communities that optimize public investment, that optimize public transit investments. With the short time available, I would just like to focus on one initiative underway in our community. Brampton is developing 2 shovel-ready pilots of urban community hubs with the collaboration of our library board, the Region of Peel, Public Health, Social Services, Housing, and our regional school boards, nonprofits, and the development industry. These urban community hubs will serve as a community cornerstone, providing integrated centers for everyone to get access to their libraries, elementary schools, daycares, housing, arts, technology, incubation hubs, community kitchens, and urban agriculture, all in the shared form. They will also serve as a network of response facilities to enable efficient delivery of public services to our residents during the time of crisis. There's a need to prioritize funding of social infrastructure and ensure early coordinated delivery facilities in high growth areas, alongside other infrastructure projects, and urban community hubs are on the way, is one way to achieve that. Just want to thank the organizers, and I'm encouraged for what has been shared, and I look forward to hearing more in the future from some of the presenters. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed again for the variety of activities already undertaking and not letting the city fall back in recovery efforts. Thank you very much. May I then request Mr. Matti Sematiki, who is the Interim Director of School of Cities at the University of Toronto.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you all today. I want to base my comments briefly around two key ideas. One is the notion of taking knowledge and turning it into action, and the second one is the art of the possible. We have known for decades that our cities are deeply unequal. Work by David Holchansky at the University of Toronto has shown that our cities have splintered into places of great affluence and sections of great poverty and exclusion. This exclusion that we're seeing in our cities is widening. It widens based on infrastructure provision, and it's widening geographically. And I think we have to be very aware that it's not just that inequality is happening, but that parts of our cities are falling further and further behind. Now, the COVID pandemic has accelerated and accentuated those divergences, and parts of our cities, in particular in the inner suburbs, places where there are many low-income people, many racialized Canadians, they are experiencing the pandemic the most acutely in terms of infection rates and in terms of the impacts on their quality of life and their economic lives. So I think we have to be very clear about the types of evidence and information that we're collecting and using that to inform action. Much of this is not new. We know a lot about these phenomena already, and we can be driving towards actions to alleviate these challenges. This brings me to my comment about the art of the possible. The pandemic has forced us to think differently about how we're going to resolve the challenges that our Canadian cities face. People on this call have eloquently spoken about the challenges and the gaps in terms of operations funding that are stacking up and causing a fiscal crisis. But we have also heard about ways that people are rethinking the provision of services. The art of the possible in this moment has enabled people to think bigger and at a scale of resolving these challenges in ways that we have often not been willing to talk about. Mayor Nenshi spoke about eliminating homelessness, not reducing homelessness, eliminating homelessness. And here in Toronto, we have moved faster on implementing bicycle lanes than would have historically been possible. And similar patterns have taken place across the country. There is a moment where people can think differently, use knowledge that we already have and that we're collecting about the impacts of the pandemic to turn this into a way of designing our cities, implementing our cities, working collaboratively across levels of government and with communities to drive changes that will benefit cities in the current moment as we recover immediately from the pandemic and as our cities go forward to address other issues like vast inequality and climate change. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to working with everyone as we address these challenges together. Thank you.
Voice, Krishnan. Krishnan, you have your mute on.
So I just wanted to thank Matti for saying that knowledge is power and we need to make use of it when we can and when we should, and the time is now. Then may I request Eleanor Mohammed, President of the Canadian Institute of Planners, to give her remarks. As I said to all the speakers, kindly confine to the time that we have, as both time is of the essence and it is short as of now. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Mohammed.
I'm here today on behalf of the Canadian Institute of Planners, but I also wear two other hats. As the co-chair of the UN Habitat Professionals Forum and also Deputy Chief Officer for the City of Beaumont, Alberta. I'm pleased to be speaking with you today from the traditional territory of Treaty 6 and acknowledge all those who share a deep connection with this land. The Canadian Institute of Planners respects the histories, languages, and cultures of all of Canada's First Peoples, whether they be First Nation, Métis, Inuit descent, and appreciates that their presence continues to enrich Canada's vibrant communities. We are all treaty people. And it's in this spirit of social reflection that I frame my comments on behalf of the Canadian Institute of Planners' 7,500 members across this nation. I'm not here today to advocate for how cities should physically look post-COVID, but urge that efforts are made to ask the right questions so we don't fall into the trap of widening inequalities that already exist and are being expressed at this very moment throughout Canada and the world. We should be applying a wide lens to what we mean by economic recovery. For instance, externalities shouldn't really be thought of as external anymore. And who should be involved in these discussions that currently are not? Addressing climate change must be a top priority, and now more than ever, we should be steadfast in upholding the principles of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the new urban agenda. I invite my political colleagues around the table to consider the powers that your respective municipalities already have. Planning is not just a regulatory tool, but can be a visionary, innovation, community building, inclusion, economic development, technology, and smart city building exercise. Post-COVID, I think we could actually see increased foot traffic in retail areas and other economic gains if the improvements to pedestrian access and cycling remain in place. We have yet to see what will happen to downtown office spaces with the changes in workplace needs, but there may be more opportunity to adapt new vacancies to residential uses, potentially reducing the housing challenges that many of our cities face. COVID-19 has been a disruptor to cities across the world. From more space afforded to pedestrians and bicycles, to improvement of air quality, to social inclusion and changing work patterns, we're learning more about how we actually want to live in the urban context, rather just than accepting the status quo. This is what many planners and urbanists have been calling for over the years, as expressed in the Canadian Institute of Planners' Healthy Communities and Climate Change Policies. This economic reset is proving to be very difficult and challenging. Yet I also see it as a positive opportunity where people of all walks of life, the environment, societal resilience, and health can finally be prioritized. Thank you.
Sorry, Christian, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm muting all the time. I don't know why. I'm just saying that the listeners also would like to maybe look into UN Habitat Professionals Forum that produce a statement regarding COVID-19 and what plans needs to be taken. Thank you once again. And now we have Douglas Reagan from UN Habitat. He is no stranger to Canada. He is originally from Vancouver, and he has been leading environmental organizations in Canada, and he has been leading the youth program in UN Habitat. Now he is a program management officer for human rights and social inclusion of UN Habitat. He has been pioneering much of work among young people in informal settlements, both in Nairobi and rest of the world. Thank you very much. Here you are, Doug Reagan.
Thank you very much, Christian. I'm really honored to be here. Thanks so much to Urban Economy Forum, Minister Morneau, CMHC, and Mitchell Cohen. I think this is a really outstanding opportunity to discuss these issues. I'm going to try to make it quick. I know there's not a lot of time, and we've been on this. I'm on the call for a while. There's just three very quick points for me. The new cities need to be socially equitable, environmentally sustainable, and we should use the SDGs as a framework. I think what we've seen with COVID-19 has done one thing. It has ripped the mask off the inequalities of the world. What we once thought were issues that we could be dealt with and in a day-to-day fashion, we now see are huge, huge inequalities. And when an issue such as this, or when a pandemic such as this hits, we really see what can happen and the devastating effects that can happen. I mean, we see that COVID-19 has hit the poorest of the poor, those most marginalized, women, seniors, the disabled. They have higher infection rates, they have higher death rates, and a lot of it is fairly obvious. They don't have access to healthcare, their jobs are unstable, and they don't have a system behind them. Address this inequality in the system. We no longer can just ignore this. I work here in Nairobi, people in informal settlements and slums, BC. And behind me, this mural is done by one of the young youth groups we work with. And I can tell you that they're incredibly passionate about protecting their communities, but again, they're doing it with very little resources, and they need to be helped and focused on. And that's a really critical part about cities, is that cities don't seem to be part of the development paradigm oftentimes. Oftentimes when we think of development as serving refugees and refugee camps and such, which are really important, but we also don't realize that there's 1 billion people living in informal settlements. In Nairobi alone, 60% of the population is in informal settlements on 8% of the land base. This is not sustainable, and it's not socially sustainable. It's not also environmentally sustainable. Again, if you have people that are crammed into these places, what they don't have access to is basic services. They don't have access to healthcare. We need to assure that cities are livable for all. We can't forget any certain group, and we see what happens. We think for UN Habitat, we believe, and we've been told that in Africa, the COVID-19 pandemic will hit sometime in July and August. It's just starting to grow here. If it gets embedded in these informal settlements, it's going to be quite devastating. So we really need to look at that. The last piece I'd like to focus on, my third piece, is SDGs. The SDGs are the roadmap, the framework in which we move forward towards environmentally and socially sustainable cities. And SDG 11 is the goal focused on cities and sustainable communities. And we must look at that and use that framework to be able to move forward. So 3 points: socially equitable, environmentally sustainable, and SDGs. Last part I'd just like to point out is really excited to do with work with CMHC, the Urban Economy Forum, the Daniels Corporation on the World Urban Pavilion in Regent Park. The reason we're doing this is because Regent Park is a global model. And this is, if we're going to talk about, as Eduardo Moreno talked about collecting data and doing data and publishing and figuring out policy around social, inclusive, and environmentally sustainable cities, the best place to do it is a place that actually is a living area that happens, and working directly with the community.
Please.
So again, my ask: include young people, include the LGBT community, and in revealing our society. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. As again, to all speakers, we have many more speakers to go. Kindly try to sort of compress your remarks as much as you can. Thank you once again, Doug, for bringing back the World Urban Pavilion in Toronto, how it will be a showcase for the rest of the world. Thank you very much indeed. And now we have Diego Kramer, who is the head of public affairs of the David Suzuki Foundation. As you know, Suzuki Foundation is very well known, renowned both in Canada and the rest of the world for championing the cause of environment and sustainable development. So since I think Dr. David Suzuki himself could not be here for the meeting, we have the pleasure of having Diego Kramer. Here you are.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to Minister Morneau and to the organizers. I think this is important, even essential in the times that we're living. I'm going to talk briefly about building back more resilient human cities. I think that's what everyone has been talking about. What we see now is buses, subways, and trains almost empty, rolling slowly through nearly empty downtowns, bringing mass people to shops where they will have to wait online on the sidewalk. Behind the mask, there is a sense of risk and uncertainty that can be read in their eyes. This image is a snapshot of any big and mid-Canadian city in times of COVID-19. The economic distress brought by the pandemic has disrupted our cities as no other event has done before. It hasn't distracted infrastructure, but rather emptied public spaces and brought human interactions in the physical space to a minimum. Yet in all this sadness and despair, many are starting to recognize a unique opportunity to build back better. Just as our societies may never be the same after this crisis, our cities will also change forever. And the way that change happens hatches an opportunity for improvement, both economic and human. In particular, structuring interventions on the way communities develop is essential for achieving the energy transition, ensuring economic prosperity, meeting the aspirations of families by diversifying housing and transportation options, improving the health of citizens, protecting agricultural land and the natural environments around cities, and optimizing infrastructure. This week, a coalition of mayors from big cities and small municipalities in the province of Quebec underlined the importance of reactivating our cities' economies in a way that create jobs while improving social and environmental performance indicators. And they have accurately pointed out that it's at the municipal and local level that most of the stimulus measures will be deployed for the reopening of businesses and services, of large parks, for the resumption of public transportation while maintaining some physical distancing measures. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions, bringing nature closer to us, and strengthening our social fabric must be systematically included in our analysis grid for future investments at the city level. These criteria will apply to support measures for our downtown cores, our commercial streets, the development of public and active transportation, the promotion of local purchasing, the renovation of buildings, and the incorporation of nature-based solutions into existing infrastructure, the beautification of public spaces, and the construction and renovation of affordable housing, something that many of you talk about. I will end up by saying that we must invest in the creation of clean, user-friendly, and inclusive spaces that improve our indicators of health, safety, and resilience to climate change. The lines that define public space and enable transportation must be redrawn from park limits to curbs to allow for new and safer human interactions. And I will end by saying that as we talk, millions of Canadians are wearing masks in the public spaces to protect themselves and others from the COVID. One day the pandemic will be behind us and we will leave our masks at home. We must then be able to circulate in our cities through thriving spaces where nature is part of our daily experience and where humans and not cars are the golden ratio upon which landscapes are built. We need cities with the cleanest air if we are to guarantee that we won't have to wear masks again for any reason. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We don't have any time to hide behind masks and we need clean air. Thank you very much indeed. And now we have urban planner Jennifer Kismet, who is the CEO and founder of Kismet Group. Her motto is, as I understand, inspiration, influence, and impact. Here you are, Jennifer Kismet.
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to see you today, and thank you to the Urban Economy Forum for this opportunity to address the group. I'll just like to take a couple of minutes to introduce the 2020 Declaration for Resilience in Canadian Cities, which is an initiative that has been designed to create a coast-to-coast interdisciplinary baseline for response to COVID-19 in Canadian cities. This declaration was launched a couple of weeks ago. It is a grassroots movement. It has been signed by former premiers and mayors, as well as academics, real estate developers, environmental leaders, authors, filmmakers, and musicians, as well as not-for-profit leaders, former city planners, as well as many people in the planning and design industry. The objective with this declaration was really to identify the immediate, quick actions that we can implement that we already know about. We don't need to do new research. We actually know that these are good initiatives for creating inclusive cities that will begin to address the environmental and systemic issues around things like housing affordability, clean air, sustainable buildings. So there's three key areas. One is under the responsible use of land. And if you go to 2020declaration.ca, you'll see that the 6 policies under the responsible use of land are all about beginning to create and transform our land use planning policies to ensure that we are providing access to affordable housing in ways that are sustainable and promote communities that are walkable and future oriented. It was said at the very beginning of this roundtable that the vast majority of the Canadian population lives in cities, but in reality, there's excellent research that we know from the university, from Queen's University, that shows that 75% of new development in Canada over the past 10 years has been in auto-oriented, completely fiscally unsustainable, but also unsustainable from a health and an environmental perspective as well. So these are actions that can be embraced, that can be transformative. They're under the columns of the responsible use of land, the acceleration of decarbonizing our transportation systems by embracing infill and walkable communities, and then also embracing sustainability in our natural environment in cities and also our built environment. And one of the underlying principles here is that a key thing we've learned through COVID-19 is that density isn't a problem, but we know that poverty and inequality is a problem, and design can either facilitate and accentuate those inequalities or can mitigate them and can lead to a fundamentally healthy and inclusive and thriving future. I'd also just like to mention in closing that under the banner of the responsible use of land, where we talk about new ways to inject affordable housing into the landscape of our cities, we have an initiative underway called the Housing Innovations Institute, which we're hoping to launch very soon, which is all about taking those 6 actions in the declaration and initiating a movement for transformation in Canadian municipalities to embrace the change that's required and that we need to see. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for your kind remarks and the resolution that you recently mentioned about the cities and towns and planning. So we hope to be continuing this conversation with you and your organization, your foundation. As I just want to remind you that we only have about 11 minutes left according to the timetable, and many of us or many of the partners want to sort of leave soon, etc. So while I kindly request you to sort of compress your statements, in case we are unable to accommodate all of you, we ensure that your statements will be part of the report that will be presenting to the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister. So let's see how it goes on for the next few minutes. Thank you once again for your patience and for your participation as we go on. We have then Jenny Moore, who is the Director of Institute of Sustainability, British Columbia Institute of Technology, which is a pioneering institute in innovation of not only technologies, of sustainability, both in ideas and action. Here you are, Jenny Moore.
Thank you. I'll keep it brief. Great comments from our minister, CMHC, UN Habitat, the Urban Economy Forum. Love Jennifer's comments. So very quickly, it's clear we need to lead with equity. People mobilize when they believe that everyone is playing a part. The government's COVID-19 response has put people first and it's well received. However, GDP is slowly losing its relevance for the majority of the middle class. And we need systems that better marry economics with well-being and ecological safety. So I think the UN Habitat Prosperity Index is a good start for us to shift to, as well as the SDGs. And we can only afford to invest in win-win solutions that's clear, that put people and planet first. So going forward, I think we also want to look at examples where we fully integrate the real costs. So example would be building housing that's both affordable, accessible, but also at the highest energy standards, zero emissions. It may cost more up front, but it yields longer substantial returns over the long term. And cities need to get to an 80% reduction in energy materials within the next 10 years. So Canada is doing a good job tying its stimulus packages to climate response and reporting for large business, but we need that same kind of commitment for urban infrastructure investment as well. Local governments can't sustain the sprawling automobile-oriented development. We've heard that already. So people need to make the shift, and we're making the shift through COVID to a new normal, rethinking what business space and street space can be used for highest and best use to maintain livability and give local entrepreneurs an opportunity. And my last comment is this: resilient strategies with staying power are local economic developments that keep money circulating within their communities. This contributes to an urban multiplier effect and positively reinforces local labor force and participation. So now is the time for us to invest in micro entrepreneurship. We can nimbly respond to local needs that build social and economic capital and pivot towards a new reality that embraces an economics of well-being within ecological limits. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As it has been always mentioned since the World Conference on Sustainable Development in Rio 1992, think globally and act locally. Unless we act locally, I don't think we can have impact globally as well. Thank you very much again, Jenny Moore. Then we have Maya Tate, who is the president of British Columbia Municipalities. Here you are, please.
Good morning, and thank you very much for this opportunity. As president of the Union of BC Municipalities, I have the pleasure and honor of representing all 189 local governments in BC. I'm also the mayor of the District of Souk, and all of us, rural, urban, everyone in between, have had and felt the effect of this pandemic on local government operations. You've heard from others about the impact and the loss of variable revenue, our inability to run deficits, and that many of our members have cut taxes, laid off staff, implemented hiring freezes, and so forth, all of which has contributed to job loss in communities. We have worked closely with the province to develop a framework, and we see this all as a very good, modest first step. And to that effect, we have been supportive of, as our peers at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and their ask for $10 million in emergency operating funding. We recognize that the losses local governments are incurring are permanent, and that direct emergency operating fund is needed to safeguard the essential services that our communities rely and depend on. We've also called for measures that would address local government funding shortfalls to mitigate the risk of tax delinquencies and facilitate a revival of local economy. In line with our federal call for transit support, we have also sought provincial assistance for transit-dependent communities. Going forward, our members have also been seeking an infrastructure stimulus framework that maximizes flexibility on project category procurement and timelines. Local governments want to see a straightforward, flexible framework that provides 100% funding for any recovery program, one that is administratively easy to implement and focuses on shovel-worthy projects. Direct allocations of federal funding and support are critical. It must be free of jurisdictional wrangling. We see real benefits in new infrastructure funding. It has historically generated significant economic returns for all local communities through increased employment and the flow through of tax dollars to local businesses and the creation of much needed community assets. I've summarized this briefly, but I wish to thank you for the opportunity. We look forward to continuing our work together to support a full economic recovery at the local, provincial, and federal level. We are all in this together. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your kind words, Maya Tate, for saying that we are all in this together and we can't have any more time wasting, the sense that we have to start acting now in recovery and reconstruction in a sustainable way. Thank you very much again. And then we have Mayor Régis Lebon, who is the mayor of Quebec City, which I think also has been experiencing the pandemic, in a much different way than the rest of the country. Maybe we would hear from His Lordship Lebon. Monsieur, hello? Can you hear me? What happened? Hello?
I believe he's not present.
I can't hear. He's not there? Okay. So then may I then take the liberty of requesting Her Lordship Lisa Helps, who is the Mayor of City of Victoria in British Columbia, which I see playing a key role in sustainability from the time that we have known that city to be the capital also of British Columbia. Thank you very much. Lisa Helps.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm here on the Lekwungen territories, so the First Nations territories that the city's home is built on. I'm not going to repeat a lot of the comments that have been made, but I am going to echo Adam Vaughan's call from earlier this morning about a new relationship between the federal, provincial, municipal, and First Nations governments coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the things that has been highlighted for me, and it's been highlighted this morning, is that Canada needs a new governance and finance arrangement that puts cities at the center, establishing on-the-ground programs and services that we can then be held accountable for delivering. Again, other people have made this point. The current structure of Canadian federalism puts urban residents and urban economies at risk. All eyes are on us right now, on cities to deliver everything: housing, childcare, transit, anti-racism programs, poverty reduction. Yet cities have little to no direct or predictable revenue to deliver these quality of life necessities. So I think coming out of the pandemic right now is a perfect moment to make fundamental shifts in federal, provincial, and municipal relationships, and also to shift in how all of these orders of government work with First Nations. And I'm so glad that Minister Morneau is here this morning, because I think there's a real opportunity for the federal government to be a catalyst and a broker. We don't need the federal government to do everything, but I think there's an opportunity right now for the federal government to work together with the provinces to establish clear expectations for municipal service delivery and create new direct sources of revenue that flow from both provincial and federal governments to municipalities. And I'm not talking about emergency funding. Other people have made that case. What I'm talking about is reshaping the way the fiscal order of our country is set up. As we all know, the property tax system that is governing the source of revenue for municipalities was set up in 1867, totally inadequate to meet the challenges and opportunities of the cities in the 21st century. So a few ideas about what a new fiscal framework could include. We've heard a lot about quality of life, the SDGs, well-being. Prime Minister Trudeau has asked Minister Fortier to develop a framework for measuring well-being. I think this is really exciting. So invest directly in cities to improve quality of life, and then measure our progress and deliverables against the federal well-being framework that's being created. Number two, with respect to climate change, invest directly in cities based on emissions reduction plans and implementation of these plans, because the only way the federal government will meet its goal of low carbon prosperity is to treat cities as delivery partners in innovation, reducing emissions, and creating jobs. Third idea in terms of what a new fiscal framework could look like is with respect to fiscal power and revenue raising. I think, again, there's a real opportunity to align the powers and revenue raising opportunities for Canadian cities with similar fiscal arrangements to ones that are permitting cities around the world to flourish. And again, just a few ideas here. There are probably a lot more. One is congestion pricing. Another might be a municipal sales tax, and then other progressive taxation and revenue raising opportunities. As we've all said this morning, city leaders have been on the front lines of responding to COVID-19. And I just want to close by saying that respecting Canada's constitutional framework doesn't mean that we can't innovate within it. We must, or we put at risk the opportunity of creating the inclusive, equitable urban economies that we've all been talking about this morning. And I think if we don't innovate within the Constitution right now as an opportunity coming out of COVID, we really do lose the chance to build back better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much again. As you rightly say, you know, the solutions of yesterday is not good for today and tomorrow. Thank you very much indeed. And now I leave the word to the Chair of Urban Economy Forum, Reza Purvasiri. His announcement to make. Reza, please.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. It's long. I'm sure you're tired, but I believe the main reason is we really need your comments, your valuable comment to include in the report for Finance Minister, and to create a kind of the kind of comprehensive plan. Based on that, please stay with us and continue your participation. It would be great for our program. Thank you so much. Alex.
Hello, everybody. Yes, thank you so much for those of you that have continued to stick on with us on this call. It's been great conversation so far. We are nearly at the end, and we still have a lot of great speakers still to continue. Next on our agenda, we have Mr. Masood Ganchi, who is the president of the Ganchi Foundation.
Yes, hello everybody, and thank you for having me here today. As you all know, the world has always been changing, and now we are in the middle of a new reality. COVID-19 is a serious challenge, but it is also a signal that we need to be more prepared and aim to change for the better. I think housing is one of the most important sectors that requires to be accommodating to people's needs during such challenging times. People shouldn't worry about losing the roof over their head. And I think the government of Canada in all the various levels did very well and became a shining star in the world. However, there is more to be done, and as we go forward, we will be facing more challenges that we should be prepared for. There were also some significant prior changing trends that COVID-19 accelerated, especially with the rapid advancement of technology and the ever-changing environment it is causing. Online shopping, work from home trends, shared economies, congested roads, damaging air pollution, rising obesity statistics, rising mental health issues, and domestic violence. All of these are some examples of the changes and the challenges societies are facing, and COVID-19 has had significant impact on them. On some very positive impacts, such as traffic and pollution, even though on short term, and on some very negative effects, such as various physical and mental health issues. I think housing can significantly affect and determine the outcome. It can make a significant contribution to the betterment of our cities and our societies. And I think the decision makers and the stakeholders should recognize the rapid changes and plan accordingly. I think we should aim to be always a step ahead. For example, more affordable housing should be encouraged, more housing that allows for a better suited environment, more housing design. I think more affordable housing and more housing that allows for better suited environments for work from home should be encouraged. Designs that encourage ride sharing, designs that positively affect the environment. We should encourage studies to see how to implement housing designs that can reduce health issues and domestic violence. One area that specifically needs attention is the zoning and development regulations, which tend to be less flexible. I think cities should be dynamic and adapt to changes easily to implement the rapidly changing needs of the society. And in this regard, the city leaders play a paramount role. Also, the important contribution that can be made by the private sector should be highlighted, and they should be more encouraged to be involved. Again, I would like to thank all the various levels of the Government of Canada for the outstanding work that they have done. And I encourage more preparedness and more involvement of the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Masood. Thank you for contributing your remarks. Next up on the agenda is Mr. Barry Morishita. Mr. Barry Morishita is the president of the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association.
Hello, thank you very much. I'll be brief. A lot of what's been said, what to say has already been said. I want to thank you very much for having this forum. As has been said before, COVID-19 in particular has accelerated and accentuated the problems that are inherent with the system of financing Canada's urban cities. And in Alberta, the AUMA represents 85% of the people that live in Alberta. And as only about 50% of our revenue comes from property taxes, which is at its best a regressive form of taxation and doesn't really reflect the realities of a new economy and the elastic nature of activity, we do have to redefine what we're doing. There's going to be potential severe impacts, and as we call for short-term funding changes, in the very same way that our long-term funding should be addressed. It should be direct, it should be unconditional, and it should be allowed that individual communities have the ability to, in fact, determine their own priorities to build resilient cities and to build communities that make a difference. As Adam Vaughan very eloquently put it, municipalities, particularly cities and urban centers, are going to be at the forefront of the recovery from COVID, and certainly the forefront of the recovery economically and growth going forward. And as COVID has really showed the weaknesses in the system, we too are calling for coordinated efforts from the provincial and federal government to deal with that short-term funding, but also to look at how we can provide long-term sustainable funding to municipalities as we go forward in order to provide that growth. I think it's really important that these significant investments be made now. A number of programs that have been instituted in the last several years have been adequate in their delivery, and I'm referring particularly to the ISIP funding with the federal government that has taken far too long in this province to deliver, and has the potential to provide a lot of economic recovery and build the infrastructure needed to have 21st century cities function properly. So again, I think removing these barriers as we go forward is the key thing. We should learn from this pandemic. We should learn that cities, urban centers can provide the leadership and growth to go forward. And so my last ask quickly is that the federal government at this moment in time needs to take the leadership role. There is a crisis right now. They need to be the leaders in the country, bring the parties together, get the programs in place, and propose changes that will serve municipalities, not just in the next few months, for the next several years. So thank you, and I enjoyed listening to the speakers today.
Thank you, Barry. It's great to have you join us from the Municipal Association in Alberta. Next up on our agenda is Mr. Benjamin Tall. Mr. Benjamin is the Deputy Chief Economist of CIBC.
Yes, thank you very much. I will be relatively brief. Every crisis is a trend accelerator, and this crisis is no different. We are going to see deglobalization. We are going to see e-commerce taking over. We are going to see remote working taking over. And all those trends, of course, will impact cities in a very significant way. I would like to focus on two trends that I think that are very, very important. One of them, of course, is housing, and it was discussed. I will not repeat what was told, but I think that we have to wake up to the reality that even after this crisis is over, the reality of the housing market and the fact that the housing market is unaffordable will remain with us. We have to make sure that people who live in the city can actually live in the city. And therefore, we need to look at some creative ways to release land in a more efficient way and to make rental solutions as the way to go. We need more rental solutions, encourage rental activity, purpose-built activity, in order to make sure that there are more options for people to live in the city that we want to live in. In addition, small businesses. Jane Jacobs said that what makes a city vibrant and safe is the busy sidewalks and mixing of people along the avenues lined with stores. Those stores are disappearing. The retail segment of the economy, as we all know, is vanishing. The damage of this crisis is so significant on the retail segment of the market. We must provide some solutions, especially when it comes to rent, when it comes to small businesses in the retail sector, because they are really disappearing. And if we don't act now, after the fog clears, the city will look different. It will be less safe, it will be less vibrant. We must help retail now. And one way of doing it is clearly helping municipalities. I'm totally with the mayor of Victoria that suggesting that we have to be more creative in the way we increase the revenue base of municipalities. We cannot ask them to lead us into this recovery with their hand ties behind their back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Benjamin. Next on the agenda, we have Ms. Rebecca Attlee, Mayor of the City of Yellowknife. Ms. Rebecca? Okay, let's move on. Next on the agenda is Ms. Julia Deans. Ms. Julia Deans is the President of Habitat for Humanity Canada. Ms. Julia, are you there? Okay, next on the agenda is Mr. Gordon Barnhart.
No, now that she's there.
Hello, Miss Julia? Okay, let's move on to Mr. Gordon Barnhart, who is the President of Municipalities of Saskatchewan, and I'll work with Julia.
Thank you very much, Alex, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this roundtable. I want to say Municipalities of Saskatchewan, we represent the villages, towns, resort villages, northern communities as cities of the province, 82% of the population. And I want to say thank you to the federal government for the early payment on the gas tax. This direct payment is very valuable to us, but it is a direct payment now. It is no new money, and we are having to look at long-term solutions. I want to deal with two issues, particularly recreational facilities that have had to close, and thus a drop in revenue for the city, and secondly, transit. In terms of the recreational facilities, these are very, very important to our population because of mental health as well as physical health. And I think keeping them open or getting them open soon is going to be very, very important to our cities. Transit, everyone has been talking about green economy. Transit is a good way to get people back and forth to work without their cars, particularly in the downtown sections of our cities. Loans are not a solution for these problems. The loss of revenue for recreational facilities and for transit, that money is gone. The lost revenue cannot be made up through future tax, property tax, and therefore we very much need a direct outright grant to the cities for those two particular facilities, rec facilities and transit. I stress to you that it's good for the environment, good for mental health, good for physical health. So that is our request from Municipalities of Saskatchewan. And I want to say that we are very much in support of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities with their request for $10 billion for transit, for operating, and for the well-being of our cities in Canada. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. I see that we have Miss Julia Deans here. Miss Julia Deans, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Bonjour à tous. Je suis Julia Deans. I'm the President and CEO of Habitat for Humanity Canada. Our goal is a world where everyone has a decent and affordable place to call home. And we work with volunteers, donors, habitat homeowners, 53 local habitats, and every order of government to help low-income families, including Indigenous families on and off reserve, build strength, stability, and independence through affordable home ownership. Habitat homeowners represent some of the vulnerable populations that are most impacted by COVID-19. And the anxieties and uncertainties that each one of us is experiencing today are nothing new for these vulnerable people. Just imagine trying to work and educate your children in an unsafe and insecure place. As we think about meeting housing needs, we shouldn't focus only on the people we see, the homeless people living on our streets and parks. We need to provide shelter to the homeless, both the homeless and people living in temporary housing, but also as an off-ramp to this, and provide people with stable long-term options, especially families. Every part of the housing spectrum is interconnected and interdependent, and we have to invest in all of these parts. Housing is infrastructure, and investing in it is investing in bricks and mortar, but it's also investing in families and the communities we need. To fully contribute to our economic and social success, people need stable and safe homes and safe and stable access to transportation and services and education and training and jobs and improved health outcomes. Our Canadian government has recently made significant investments in affordable housing under the National Housing Strategy. With the pressure on affordable housing providers to do even more, continuing these investments is absolutely critical to building the affordable housing people need, especially in cities. What else is critical? Access to land that is affordable with differentiated property taxes and development fees to allow homes to stay affordable in perpetuity, as Mitch Cohen said. This includes identifying and freeing up surplus government lands for affordable housing. We need to look at revising building and zoning regulations to encourage and accelerate affordable housing for the people who will rebuild and sustain our cities and their economies. And we need infrastructure funding to invest in housing and innovations to improve the safety and resilience of our housing and communities. We need to create affordable housing together and with a sense of urgency. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for sharing your remarks on the importance of affordable housing and the more vulnerable population in our society. Next, we have Mr. Ralph Growing, who is the president of the Association of Manitoba Municipalities.
Good day to everyone, and thank you to the organizers for setting up this very valuable opportunity to comment. I'm the president of the Association of Manitoba Municipalities, and we represent all 137 municipalities, including the city of Winnipeg. COVID-19 has affected us all, and we've had lots of discussion about the impact. Municipalities have done what they could to minimize the impact on our municipalities, minimize the layoffs, and certainly to minimize tax increases. However, these cost-saving measures don't go without their challenges, like some of them have mentioned. Municipalities are faced with limited revenue due to closure of rec centers. Public transit system ridership is way down. There's a serious problem, and it is fundamental. And this point is been made a number of times. I will add to it. Property tax is our primary source of funding. That is a part of the problem that needs to be addressed. So we can't run deficits. So what do? We have to continue to operate services and to provide the basics for our people. Now, there has been some action. We want to say thank you. Points been made. The $2.2 billion of early gas tax money is appreciated. Thank you very much. I will add my voice, though, to the FCM request for the $10 billion. My colleagues have made that point, and I will add to it. Municipal services are at risk. Transit systems are struggling. We need dollars. We need money that will be provided in a straightforward, direct, and inflexible fashion. So I will conclude by two quick comments. One is, and we've made the point about access to broadband, we need to urge the government to launch the Universal Broadband Fund to accelerate funding for shovel-ready projects. And we, AMM, together with all other municipal organizations, want to encourage the government to expedite investing in Canada approvals so that municipalities can take advantage of the short construction season. Let's help to move Canada along in a post-pandemic challenge. So again, I say thank you very much for the opportunity to make a few quick comments on this very important and challenging topic. We need to change the way we do things. That point's been made. I add my voice to it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ralph. That was very concise points on what's needed to move forward for not just Manitoba cities, but Canadian cities as well. I would like to now invite Mr. Mike Savage, the Mayor of the City of Halifax, to the floor. Mayor Savage. Okay, I would then next like to move to Mr. Jose Echeverry, who is the York University Board of Governors.
Yes, buenos dias, bonjour, good morning. A pleasure being with all of you, and thanks for this opportunity. I want to say just one thing. I'm very, very pleased that so many of you are in agreement that using the Sustainable Development Goals to guide the recovery of our country and our planet should be considered as a guiding principle. I thank you for that. All I have to say is us here in one of Canada's largest public universities are here to serve the public good. That means servicing the needs of citizens and society. And we're about to become a university that uses the Sustainable Development Goals as its organizing principles. And we're here to help all of you to achieve your goals of a more just, clean, and equitable Canada. I encourage all of you that are in this call and watching in YouTube to remember that public universities are here to serve the public good. Whether it is York University or your local university, they are generally full of very thoughtful people that want to help society. So we're here to serve. I thank the Urban Economy Forum to make this symposium a reality. And we will continue to help using the Sustainable Development Goals and the Earth Charter as guiding principles. That's what we need now. We need moorings that help us develop strategies to reconstruct our nation and our planet. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you, Jose. As always, it's great to hear from you and your ideas going forward. Next on the agenda, we have Mr. Ray Orb. Mr. Ray Orb is the president of Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities.
Yes, thank you very much. And as president of Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities, on behalf of them from Saskatchewan, I'm pleased to lend a rural voice to this conversation. 90% of Canada's municipalities are located outside metropolitan areas and home to almost 1/3 of the country's population. Urban and rural economies are not mutually exclusive. We need the resources and production coming from rural areas to create the jobs and economic opportunities for value-added businesses that support these sectors. And we need the workforce, commercial businesses, housing, and healthcare supports the urban centers provide. Rural communities are essential to the national economy. A report by FCM indicates that rural communities employ over 4 million Canadians, generating over 27% of the national GDP, while provinces like Saskatchewan and Alberta contributing much more. We are the largest exporter of durum wheat, canola, and pulse crops around the world, and second largest beef cattle producing provinces in Canada. We are home to the world's largest primary uranium mine. Much of Canada's resource development does happen in rural communities, and when these sectors suffer, our communities feel the pressure. So these industries need support and stimulation that are integral to the well-being of the country. COVID-19 caused concerns with supply chains and getting goods to market. And in times like these, we recognize how essential this is in sustaining communities across the province, the country, and the world. Municipalities shoulder 60% of Canada's public infrastructure, yet with access to just 8 to 10 cents of every tax dollar. Rural communities with fewer ratepayers already feel the pinch. And with added financial uncertainties brought on by the pandemic, RMs are rightfully concerned about the loss of tax revenue. With inability for rural municipalities to run operating deficits, municipalities are at risk of having to cut essential services and are looking to the federal government for help. If urban centers are the engines of growth, rural communities are the fuel for the engines. There is integration between rural and urban economies, and health and success of one affects the other. The rural economy needs to be strong to help the country recover and stabilize. We know that FCM is requesting between $10 to $15 billion in federal operating assistance. It's imperative that rural municipalities be considered in the funding equation. In closing, I'd like to mention that we here across the country, we are all in this together. So let's ensure our rural communities and economies are recognized and supported so we can continue to be the fuel for the economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Yes, it's very important to have that rural perspective, not just for Canada, but also for the world. As we move on to kind of our final stage here of our meeting, I would like to turn it back over to Mr. Krishnan to just kind of lead the general comments and as well as our wrap-up session.
Thank you very much. Thanks again. It has been such a inspiring, useful, informative, and well-packed session with a number of ideas coming in, not just ideas, but ideas for action and examples of what works and what doesn't work. It's very difficult to sort of summarize all the discussions in a very short time, in the course of 2 or 3 minutes. Some of the main points that I have picked up is there will be a lot of funding opportunities, funding already made from the federal government. Federal government is aware of the need for the disbursement of not only sort of immediate action, also on the longer term. So federal government and the Ministry of Finance has been quite forthcoming in setting in motion number of measures indeed. Then it has been said that the municipalities and cities, in a way, are the front line of meeting this crisis. and they need to be supported. Funds needs to be made available to these municipalities as much as possible. It has also been mentioned that, in order to take any action, we also need to measure what kind of action needs to be taken. That's why I think UN Habitat's intervention of saying that it's important to have the Canadian cities report in a post-COVID context, which I think we will be supportive of, and it's interesting and important to follow up. And then it's also mentioned that we cannot think of ideas coming from the top. There's a need to be a bottom-up approach, and there is need to be empowering the communities, and municipalities and cities need not be seen as people coming with a cap in the hand for funding. It should be sort of funding necessary. As the last speaker said, there is disproportionate burden on municipalities, both rural and urban. At the same time, there is more role they have to play in maintaining the infrastructure and the process of building the cities and towns. Then we also sort of heard that we have to think of innovative ways of providing housing for the homeless. The rental example was made by the representative of the bank, saying that we have to think of post-COVID rental option as an important thing, not necessarily owning houses. And we also heard about the need for confining to sustainable development goals and how we can make use of the COVID-19 reconstruction and recovery as a way to implement sustainable development goals also at the city level. And Canada plays an important role internationally, and this needs to be made use of in convening the municipalities and cities globally with the intervention or with the influence of Canada, so that we can create a global dialogue in this process. And then we also have heard that the global urban pavilion would be an important window of opportunity, both supported by the Daniels Foundation and the CMHC, so that this is our important what shall I say, institution that needs to be established as soon as possible. So these are some of the general ideas that I have picked up from the discussions. Of course, much more has been said, and so it may be interesting to listen to others who are here, like Eugene Vandenberg, Edmundo Morena, Derek Gibson, and Reza, and others to see that we would like to speak. In the meantime, I will also leave the floor open to anybody who wants to come up with brief comments, because we don't need to be sort of a monologue of many dialogues. So if anybody has important points to make now, they can do so before the intervention of other people. The floor is open. Anyone?
Perhaps, sorry, Krishna, I'm
Julie,
still
yes,
here.
absolutely,
Sorry.
yes, come, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, I had a kind of family crisis in the middle of this, which I had to deal with. So I was taking some notes and I will have missed some important points, but I suppose I'd just like to stress the importance of civil society. There were some speakers who talked about the importance of government funding to voluntary organisations and NGOs, but I can't stress enough how important it is at the minute for people to be involved in some of the decision making and the policy shaping that is happening, because there's so much innovation happening at a grassroots level, at a street level even, where people are finding solutions to all kinds of really difficult problems that they didn't even know they'd have to face. So we have a duty. I think, you know, we've been having this conversation here today as people who've been privileged to have a position in an institution, or you know, or an elected position, or a policy position, or a position in a university or whatever. But actually, the real experts are often the places that we came from before we were here. So I just want to say, let's make sure that civil society are really, really involved and being listened to. And I mean at all levels. So one of the things that's been happening here in the UK is, I'm a child rights campaigner, and we realized there were lots of children and young people who were not being included in the, not being allowed to speak or ask questions in the government's daily press briefings about the coronavirus response. And they're very upset about that. And some of these children and young people, and they are also carers. So they're children, under 18s who've got responsibilities both before the crisis, but even more so now, of caring for vulnerable people, and they weren't being listened to. So, and they have a lot to say about how things should be better from their perspective. So I think that we have a real duty to try and broaden out this conversation. We've had this great, important conversation today about mayors, town leaders, city leaders, the government stepping up to do extraordinary things. But actually, we have to continue to keep that pathway open with civil society. I mean, you said it yourself, with grassroots. So that's an important point for me. And perhaps also it was mentioned a few times about mental health and well-being. And that's super important as well. And that's going to be even more important going forwards. And in many of our communities and societies, our mental health services have been our Cinderella services, and they can no longer be our Cinderella services.
Thank you. Thanks, Julie, for this intervention. Now, may I leave the floor to Edmundo? He wanted to say a few words.
Yes, thank you very much for this invitation and for the opportunity to be part of this wonderful event with the minister and everybody else. Well, I work in one of the UN agencies, the ILO International Labour Office, sister agency of the UN Habitat and UNEP, which were with you. Our perspective is livelihoods, employment, and income, and that's where we come from. But it's difficult in 1 minute that I have to bring something new after this wealth of knowledge that I've heard here today. But I can at least share with you that the ILO is deeply into finding solutions for COVID-19 for enterprises and for workers. And if you look at the website, I'm sure that you find lots of interesting ideas, inspirational ideas. I am an urbanist, therefore, and being inside the ILO, my focus is really on what is done at the urban level. And I think that what I heard today and what I knew, Canada has challenges and of course needs solutions, but I also heard lots of good ideas and actions. And as we, and I in particular, work mainly with much poorer countries in the world, I've been thinking about the opportunity to have an exchange of good practices between countries. I'm sure that Canada will have a lot to tell, a lot to exchange, a lot to teach other countries about all these good solutions that I've heard here. I don't need to recap them all, but perhaps it will learn a little bit as well. And to conclude, I think that there are many needs, of course, to bring the economy, the urban economy, back into its foot. What we are trying to do in other countries, I don't know how much it fits Canada or not, but is that all these new businesses that need to come on board, like disinfecting business workplaces, personal protective equipment, etc., the production of these services, the provision of these services and products, they are businesses in themselves. They will create wealth. if they come into the economy. They become part of the urban economy and with multiplier effect. So it's not only the government giving or spending money, but the government also encouraging new business to come into play. And finally, as it was been said, I think that the COVID, it brought some more attention to urban development, to the urban development paradigm. Unfortunately, it was through a crisis, but at least in many, many other countries, I don't know Canada, but in many countries, they have really a rural bias. They think that everything depends on rural development. And I think that now it's clear that without a strong urban economy, we cannot develop. Therefore, it's unfortunate that it happened through the COVID, but we will come out stronger after the crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Edmundo. For you may wish to know that ILO was formed even before the UN. That is, it will be 75 years this year. ILO was formed in 1919. It celebrated 100 years last year. So I think your experience is important in as being part of the UN family. Thank you very much indeed. And is there any others would like to take the floor? For example, would Derek Giberson?
Sure. Just very, very briefly.
Yes.
I just want to repeat two things that we heard today. One of them is that crises tend to be accelerators of change, and that we also heard a number of our speakers today talk about local economies. COVID-19 needs to be seen as an opportunity to accelerate change towards the relocalization and re-empowerment of local economies. And I will just add one other note. As a steering committee member, I don't think I'm stepping too far out of line by saying on behalf of the other steering committee members that thank you very much to the team that put together a wonderful event today, and wanted to make sure that you were acknowledged.
Thank you, Terry. You've always been helpful and important part of this initiative. Then may I request Reid McAlpine? Reid is there?
Reid had to
Yes.
step out.
Okay. Is Eugene there, please? Vandenberg? Eugene? Any other from the round table would like to take the floor now? It is the time. Seems to be silence.
I see that we have some individuals who participated but did not get a chance to speak. I know Harry Burchill from the.
Are they there? Are they there? If they can make a brief remark if they want.
Harry, or even Laura Fuller from the UN, I believe. Anybody?
Looks like many have left the round table, leaving us to eat all of the food. So then may I request, finally, is there anyone else who would like to make a comment? May leave the floor to Reza.
Thank you so much, Krishnan, for your wonderful curation and very great highlights from the fantastic gathering. I want to say gathering because we come together to establish some things. I believe it's a kind of ongoing program for the future of urbanism, future of urban economy. And it would be great if we be in touch with the Canadian city leaders for the close future. We really want to have the valuable comments and valuable idea of Canadian mayors, and because we are in this program we focused on Canada, and I appreciate everyone, and I believe we are at the beginning of the work, and we hope to get more collaboration and involve more people for this valuable step. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much indeed. And I understand that Julie wanted to say a few words before she leaves. Julie, did you?
No, I said it earlier.
Okay.
You know, just not to forget civil society. We have to be working at all levels. I think it's interesting that I'm here as an international politician, but I constantly talk about the local, and I think that we, it's up to us to see that those links are made, because so many of our problems in society are because people at a local level feel distanced from power, from decision making, and I'm acutely aware of that given what happened to my own country regarding Brexit. So the more we can build that trust with citizens, the more we can involve people in making decisions, helping us to make good decisions, the more we can make people feel empowered and value their experiences, I think the more successful our initiatives will be. Right.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your words across the Atlantic at this point of time.
Okay.
And it has been a nice experience for me. I've learned a lot myself. And as Reza said in the opening remarks, the proceedings of the meetings will be compiled and edited and submitted to the finance minister and the prime minister, as well as this is only one of the series of meetings that we'll have under this program. So we rely on your support and help and advice as to how to move forward so that COVID-19 recovery does not become business as usual. I think it's important that we have this mind, and I really appreciate and thank Reza for this unique global initiative, bringing people to the ground, as Julie says, that we have to be grounded to have solutions. That's important to have at the global level as well. Thank you very much from my side. If others, Alex and Evan and Hilda has been doing a wonderful job in this context. Reza, your final words?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, our team. Thank you, steering committee. And Evan, Alex, Fazila, Hilda, Asha, and lots of people that help us in this regard. Thank you, Krishnan, and steering committee. Definitely, I forget some names. I really appreciate for your valuable efforts to happen this great roundtable. It's just starting. See you then.
Thank you very much indeed. Have a nice evening, nice day, nice weekend, and happy Environment Day.
Happy Environment.
Okay, bye.
Hasta la vista.
Bye all.
Thank you, Ralph.